You won't believe the final twist. She thought she was buying love, but she was only renting their time, and the lease just expired. Moneybag at 83, Evelyn was finally ready to settle the score. I straightened the folds in my silk navy dress, a vintage piece that had once been Eleanor Roosevelt's favorite style, or so the shop owner claimed. I smoothed out the invisible wrinkles. It was the kind of dress I'd always considered perfectly appropriate for a sophisticated family dinner at their new, upscale residence. Not too flashy to trigger another sarcastic remark from Tiffany, but decent enough to ensure I didn't look like a charity case, a subtle distinction that mattered immensely in their world. At 83, I had long since stopped chasing the fleeting whims of Vogue, but maintaining a neat, almost regal appearance was a principle I adhered to, a silent nod to the high standards my late husband, George, and I had upheld. Scott had insisted dinner would begin promptly at 7. I still had an agonizing hour to fill. I glanced around my familiar, cozy living room, where every single object held a weighted memory, a chapter of my life. A framed photograph of George and me, taken at our golden wedding anniversary. He looked so vital, so full of that quiet, commanding strength. Another captured a tiny, 7-year-old Scott on a muddy riverbank, his face alight with pure joy, clutching the very first trout he'd ever caught. Then there was Jonathan and Samantha at their college graduation, two bright faces poised on the cusp of a world that hadn't yet learned to disappoint them. These pictures, these silent sentinels, bore witness to a time when our family orbit was tighter, more honest, a golden age that now felt like a very expensive, very faded myth. My gaze, heavy with 18 years of unspoken grief, lingered on George's portrait. What counsel would he offer now, my strong, sensible rock? I still, in moments of deep uncertainty, mentally deferred to him, seeking that calm, unshakable guidance. Evelyn, my dear, never allow anyone to deplete your spirit, he would have certainly warned, his voice a steady rumble of wisdom. George always knew how to establish and maintain unyielding boundaries, even with his own adult children. I, on the other hand, had proven tragically incapable of saying no, a weakness that had become a financial and emotional liability. The antique mahogany phone table began to hum, the vibration of my modern smartphone a jarring intrusion in the quiet, old-world room. A message from Scott. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. I reached for my tortoiseshell reading glasses, anticipating a quick confirmation or perhaps a rare moment of thoughtful inquiry about whether I required a lift to their new residence, a courtesy he had seldom extended in recent, increasingly strained years. The screen glowed with his words, "Mom, I'm genuinely sorry, but we have to cancel dinner tonight. Tiffany is hosting a huge, mandatory gathering for her senior partners. We'll reschedule for another evening very soon." I read the text once, then again. Something felt jarringly wrong, like a wrong note in a symphony. Just yesterday, Scott had called, his voice unusually urgent, almost insistent, that my presence was absolutely required, something about a major family announcement. He'd made it sound like a decree, not an invitation. I was just rereading his lame excuse when the phone vibrated again, a new, anonymous-looking notification eclipsing his. It wasn't a joke, it was a punch to the gut. "You were never invited to dinner. My wife explicitly asked that you not be here tonight. She's tired of your passive-aggressive presence." My hand, aged and spotted, began to tremble uncontrollably, the expensive smartphone threatening to slip from my grasp and shatter on the polished oak floor. My heart seized, a terrifying, tight spasm, as if a ghost from a cold November night had wrapped icy, merciless fingers around it. It simply could not be from Scott, my firstborn, the child I had carried and nurtured, the man I had sacrificed for. Yet, there it was, his name, his number, an indisputable, sickening provenance. I sank slowly, bonelessly, into the nearest armchair, the phone still clutched like the last, fragile anchor to a crumbling reality. You won't believe what happened next. Memories, sharp and vivid, began to flash before my eyes, a devastating, high-speed reel of emotional investment and betrayal. A small Scott, barely 3, clinging desperately to my skirt on the dreaded first morning of kindergarten. A gangly, hormone-addled teenage Scott awkwardly asking for advice on how to talk to the pretty new girl in his chemistry class. An adult Scott, beaming with a pride that made my heart swell, introducing me to Tiffany, his radiant bride. And now this poison text message, cold, brutally detached, alienating, a final, cruel severing of the maternal cord. Was this sudden, devastating honesty an impulsive decision born of a marital argument, or simply the first time they'd dropped the elaborate, costly facade? How many strained smiles had been fake? How many forced, begrudging invitations had been tossed my way over the years, accompanied by an internal eye roll that I was too self-deceiving to perceive? The revelation hit me like a rogue wave. My gaze, now cold and utterly clear, fell upon a glossy brochure lying carelessly on the side table, a brightly colored, glossy advertisement for the River's Edge Manor, their new, opulent apartment complex. A multi-story brownstone townhouse overlooking the exclusive riverfront with a private, deep-water dock. The house for which I had quietly transferred a down payment of $250,000 just 9 months ago. Scott's words echoed in the hollow room. "Mom, it's a brilliant investment in our future, a perfect place for all our family gatherings. Your special corner will always be there, of course." My corner. I managed a sound that might have been a bitter, chilling laugh. Apparently, that $250,000 corner had just been electronically deleted. I remembered the exact, sun-drenched day Scott and I had been at the bank. The branch manager, a meticulously groomed young man, had looked at me with poorly concealed surprise, almost pity, as I signed the hefty, irrevocable cashier's check. "Are you absolutely certain, Mrs. Hawthorne? It's a substantial sum to transfer to your son." I had been certain. George had left me more than enough to live comfortably, specifically so that I could offer substantial help to our son, a springboard, not a hammock, he'd stipulated, a subtle warning I had failed to heed. Helping Scott felt like the unquestionably right, morally sound thing to do. But that first domino was followed by a cascade of other, smaller, less justifiable investments, a sleek, top-of-the-line German sedan for Scott, safer for transporting the grandchildren, Jonathan and Samantha, a crucial necessity. A year's worth of tuition for an elite private academy for Jonathan, because the poor boy has special educational requirements, Mom, and the public schools just don't cut it. The elaborate kitchen renovation Tiffany had coveted for so long, a gourmet space now featured in Architectural Digest. She works so incredibly hard, Evelyn. She deserves that level of luxury and comfort. Each time, without question or hesitation, I had dutifully pulled out my checkbook, and each time, the transaction felt less like an act of love and more like an emotional tax payment, a necessary tribute to maintain peace and access. And what was the total return on my years of profound, selfless investment? Infrequent, rushed, almost formal phone calls. Brief, obligatory appearances on major holidays. And now this digitized, alienating dagger to the heart. I rose slowly, with a newly discovered, almost mechanical stiffness, and walked over to the antique, cherrywood secretary desk I had inherited from my own mother. The top right drawer, the sacred repository where I kept all my financial documents, folders neatly labeled with receipts, bank statements, and canceled checks. The file tabbed simply Scott was by far the thickest, expanding almost obscenely out of its manila confines. I opened it and began to sift through the contents, a silent, utterly sober audit of my life's giving. Here was a check for $35,000, the seed money for a groundbreaking tech startup that Scott had prematurely abandoned after a mere 6 unproductive months. A receipt for Tiffany's expensive executive leadership courses at a top university. An invoice for extensive roof repairs on their previous, smaller, perfectly adequate home. Jonathan's exorbitant specialty car insurance. How many transactions? How many things had I paid for over those years? How many times had I supported, rescued, and financially sustained them, and for what brutal, agonizing final cost? To be brutally, electronically banned from the threshold of a house that my own $250,000 check had made possible. The phone vibrated again, forcing a small flinch. A heart-stopping moment. But this was a different messenger. Samantha, my thoughtful, sweet granddaughter, my only remaining source of unadulterated sunshine. Grandma, are you coming over today? I really, truly miss you. I made you a painting. My hand hovered over the familiar keyboard. Samantha had always been the anomaly, the genuinely sincere one, the caring soul. Even when her self-absorbed parents and brother seemed to have collectively forgotten my existence, she made time for an unexpected, quick stop-by, a video call, a simple, genuine inquiry about my well-being. I typed slowly, deliberately, a calculated measure of restraint in every syllable. Honey, it appears your parents have decided it would be much better for me to simply stay home tonight. I hit send. The reply was instantaneous. What? Why? Dad specifically said yesterday you absolutely, positively had to be here. Did you two fight? So, Samantha was being deliberately kept in the dark, another casualty of their emotional warfare. I could vividly picture her now, standing somewhere in that new, sleek, expensive house, the house I had essentially bought for them, her brow furrowed in confusion, her beautiful face a mask of perplexed disappointment. My gaze returned, laser-focused, to the bulging file folder on the secretary. All these years, I had foolishly believed I was accumulating my family's love, respect, and enduring presence. But as the devastating truth now revealed itself, I had only been renting their time and feigned attention, and the ridiculously expensive lease had just been unceremoniously terminated. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady now with a sudden, icy resolve, and dialed the direct number for First Liberty National Bank. After a few precise, familiar beeps, a polite female voice, chipper and overly professional, answered. Good evening, First Liberty National Bank. This is Doris. How may I directly assist you this evening? Good evening, Doris. My name is Evelyn Hawthorne. I need to consult with you about some urgent, regular payment obligations from my accounts. Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne. I will need to ask a few standard security questions to verify your identity. Is that acceptable? As Doris listed her questions, mother's maiden name, childhood address, the street name of my first pet, a peculiar query, I always thought, and I calmly and patiently provided the accurate answers, a plan began to rapidly coalesce in my mind. A strategy that was not only clear and ruthlessly efficient, but, in a twisted, satisfying way, perfectly fair. Thank you for the confirmation, Mrs. Hawthorne. What exactly can I do for you regarding your payments? Doris's voice was warm, unsuspecting. I need you to immediately and permanently cancel every single automatic payment, direct debit, and scheduled transfer from all of my active accounts. Every single one. There was a distinct, audible pause on the line, the sound of an efficient young woman processing a wholly unprecedented request. All payments, Mrs. Hawthorne? You seem to have a rather substantial number of recurring transactions. Yes, Doris. All of them. And while you are in the system, I also need to immediately revoke the full power of attorney I previously granted to my son, Scott Hawthorne. I see. I could hear the subtle, professional confusion in her tone. Mrs. Hawthorne, this is a very significant change. Perhaps you should come down to the branch tomorrow morning for a more detailed. I will be at your bank branch precisely when you open tomorrow morning to sign any and all necessary documents, I interrupted, my voice sharp and entirely devoid of negotiation. But I require this suspension process to begin, effective immediately today. Is that logistically possible, Doris? Another, longer pause. Yes, Mrs. Hawthorne, we can definitely implement a temporary, immediate suspension of all recurring transactions until your in-person visit. But a full, permanent reversal will indeed require your signed authorization. Oh, that is absolutely wonderful, Doris. Suspend everything right now. Every single payment. While I heard the frantic, rapid-fire clicking of keys on her computer, I looked one last, resolute time at George's picture. You are so right, my darling. You simply cannot allow people to step on your neck, not even your own beloved son. Ready, Mrs. Hawthorne? Temporary suspension activated. You had a grand total of. Doris paused dramatically. 189 regular payments and recurring transfers. all of which are now blocked until your visit to the branch tomorrow. 189. I had been paying for 189 separate things for them. I had absolutely no idea the financial tendrils of my generosity had reached so deep, grown so numerous. 189 ways I had financially supported my son, his wife, and their expensive lifestyle. Thank you, Doris. I will be there the very moment the doors open. I hung up the phone and experienced a sudden, dizzying, wonderful sense of relief. It was as if a massive, burdensome backpack, one I had unknowingly been carrying for years, had been suddenly, wonderfully, lifted from my 83-year-old shoulders. The phone vibrated again. Scott. Samantha must have already contacted him, her innocent confusion sparking his immediate financial panic. I didn't even bother to answer the call. Instead, I typed a very short, perfectly concise message. A final, glorious declaration of independence. Then kindly pay your own way, freeloaders. Hold your breath, you won't believe what happens next. My finger momentarily froze, hovering agonizingly over the send button. Was I truly prepared to cross this final, irrevocable line? To utterly dismantle the fragile, unsustainable peace I had maintained for so long with my patience and my wealth? But hadn't they been the first, the ultimate destroyers, by denying me even the most basic human respect? Hadn't they already decided I was superfluous, no longer needed, not even in the expensive, meticulously planned house I had essentially paid for? I pressed send. Then, with a definitive, satisfying click, I powered the phone completely off. In the profound, almost sacred quiet of my living room, I felt a strange, exhilarating calm. For the first time in what felt like decades, I had acted decisively and selfishly, not for my son or his demanding family, but for Evelyn Hawthorne. And the feeling was utterly, intoxicatingly liberating. I walked to the closet and retrieved an old, velvet-covered photo album. As I gently turned the stiff pages of my life, my vibrant wedding to George, Scott's dramatic birth, unforgettable summer vacations in the Hamptons, I had a devastating, crystal-clear realization. Somewhere along that long, winding road, I had utterly lost myself, melting away into the constant, pressing needs of others, forgetting my own dignity and my own keenly felt desires. George had always warned me, Evelyn, don't ever let anyone take you for granted, for even a moment. Even in his final, fading moments, he had extracted a promise from me to care for myself with the same fierce devotion I had always shown to others. Until this very moment, this cold October evening, I had failed to keep that sacred promise. I closed the album, placed it back on the shelf, and slowly, deliberately, removed the now meaningless silk dress I had prepared for a dinner that never materialized. I changed into my worn, comfortable housecoat. I brewed a single cup of perfectly steeped chamomile tea and pulled out a leather-bound book, a complex, psychological thriller that I had been meaning to read for months, but which I had always set aside because of the endless, nonstop obligations and demands of Scott's family. Tomorrow would dawn a new day, the beginning of a brand new chapter in my life, one free from the suffocating financial shackles that had bound me, like a slave to a master, to people who valued neither my help nor my self-respect. 189 receipts. 189 perfectly good reasons to finally move on. I took a long, restorative sip of the steaming tea, savoring the profound silence and the breathtaking freedom of my own choice. My phone remained off, and my heart, for the first time in a very long time, beat steady, calm, and powerfully my own. The First Liberty National Bank branch didn't open its ornate bronze doors until 9 in the morning, a ludicrously late hour for the modern financial world, yet I found myself waiting, already seated in my sleek, black Cadillac sedan DeVille, precisely 35 minutes before opening time. The preceding night had been astonishingly peaceful, the first time in an embarrassingly long period that I had enjoyed a deep, truly restorative sleep without the dulling assistance of my prescription medication. The sheer, cold-edged clarity of my determination was fueling me, lending a brisk, unfamiliar strength to my elderly frame. When the clock's minute hand finally aligned with the 9, signifying the bank's official opening, I was the very first customer, a woman on an urgent, highly personal mission. The young woman behind the counter, Doris from last night's phone call, offered me a welcoming, practiced smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Hawthorne. Can I help you with something specific?" "Good morning, Doris. I need to see Mrs. Linda Howard immediately," I replied, my voice perfectly modulated, a model of polite, unyielding efficiency. Linda Howard had been working at this same branch for nearly 27 years. She was the trusted, discreet professional whom George and I had always relied upon, a repository of our family's financial history. A few short, tense minutes later, I was ushered into the cool, quiet sanctuary of Linda's private office. She hadn't visibly aged much over the years. The same impeccably neat, prematurely silver hair, the same pair of sharp, attentively professional eyes peering out from behind her thin-rimmed glasses. "Evelyn, my dear, it is good to finally see you." She offered a warm, genuine handshake. "I was immediately informed about your late-night call yesterday. All 189 payments have been suspended, exactly as you ordered. But is anything terribly wrong?" I met her gaze, direct and unwavering. "Linda, I want to cancel every single one of those payments permanently and, moreover, I need to immediately and fully revoke Scott's existing access and his power of attorney over all my accounts. Is that clear?" Linda removed her glasses, a well-known, contemplative gesture I had observed countless times over the decades, and meticulously wiped the lenses with a crisp, linen tissue. "Evelyn, we have known each other for a substantial number of years. Are you certain about this? This is undeniably a very significant, even radical, decision for you to make." "I am perfectly, absolutely certain." She nodded, acknowledging the finality in my tone, and her fingers began their rapid dance across her keyboard. "Very well, then. I will prepare all the necessary, binding documents. It will require some time. As Doris mentioned, you do have an unusually large volume of automatic payments." While the bank's internal system whirred, digitally generating the thick stack of documents, Linda efficiently pulled out a thick, bound folder from her desk. "Here is an exhaustive printout of every single one of your regular transactions for the past year. It might be helpful for you to review them, Evelyn, just to ensure you haven't missed a crucial, legitimate bill or perhaps forgotten a key obligation." I accepted the heavy folder and slowly opened it. Pages upon pages of condensed statements. Each single line item represented money flowing directly out of my pocket and into the vast, gaping maw of my son's family's expensive existence. The very first transaction listed was the monthly, exorbitant mortgage payment for Scott and Tiffany's new riverfront mansion, $5,100. I vividly recalled the day Scott had given me the grand tour of the unfinished property. "Mom, this house is the absolute perfect foundation for our growing family. And for you, there's a custom-built guest suite with its own private marble bath, conveniently located on the ground floor. No more climbing those tiring stairs, Mom." A coveted guest room I had never once been allowed to sleep in, a privileged space I was now explicitly banned from entering. Next on the list was the quarterly insurance premium for Tiffany's bespoke luxury SUV, the vehicle she insisted was absolutely essential for conducting her business with her high-net-worth clientele. The cost, $1,150. I kept turning the pages, my cold audit continuing, payment for a private, exclusive country club membership, where Tiffany allegedly cultivated her crucial professional network. Fees for an elite, boutique dental clinic because poor Jonathan had a specialized occlusion issue that required the absolute best, highest-priced specialist in the tri-state area. And finally, Samantha's college tuition, the only line-item expense in the entire folder that did not cause a flicker of regret or resentment. Every receipt brought flooding back a memory of the specific conversation, the thinly veiled request, sometimes even the accompanying, calculated tears. "Mom, we're just terribly stretched thin right now. The year-end is brutal. Grandmother, this is the newest model. I'll be a complete social outcast without it. Think of the complexes. Evelyn, surely you don't want your precious grandson to suffer from a crippling feeling of being less than, do you?" Receipt after damning receipt, page after painful page, charting a detailed map of my years of blinding naivety and their boundless, corrosive entitlement. Here are the documents to legally cancel all the recurring payments. Evelyn, Linda's voice, now hushed and sympathetic, brought me sharply back to the present. And, of course, the finalized power of attorney revocation form. Please read everything thoroughly and sign if you are in complete agreement. I took the heavy gold pen and signed each document with a single, firm, unhesitating movement. Evelyn, Linda leaned forward, lowering her voice to a confidential murmur. If you require any assistance, any confidential advice, or simply a friendly shoulder. It's genuinely quite all right, Linda. I offered her a small, tight, genuine smile. For the very first time in what feels like forever, everything is absolutely, perfectly okay. Leaving the hushed atmosphere of the bank, I felt an extraordinary lightness, as if I had instantaneously shed a literal, physical weight that had been slowly crushing me for years. My next, highly anticipated destination was the familiar, upscale office of my attorney, Francis Whitaker. Francis had been handling our complex family affairs since George was still alive. His distinguished, graying beard had grown noticeably longer. His glasses were certainly thicker, but the sly, knowing, almost mischievous glint in his intelligent eyes remained exactly the same. Mrs. Hawthorne, what an exceptionally pleasant surprise. He gestured politely toward the plush, leather client chair. What critical matter can I assist you with today? I want to entirely change my will, Francis, I stated, my voice calm, firm, and astonishingly confident. And, more importantly, I need to establish a comprehensive lifetime irrevocable trust immediately to legally shield and protect all my remaining assets. Francis's eyebrow, the one that wasn't already concealed by his thick hair, arched slightly. May I discreetly ask what has ultimately prompted this rather dramatic and substantial decision, Evelyn? Let us just say that family circumstances have shifted, irrevocably. I was purposefully vague, not yet ready to share the full, humiliating scope of the betrayal. I simply need to understand the precise legal mechanisms by which I can safely, securely, and permanently manage my finances without any possible interference from my son or his increasingly demanding family. He nodded instantly, sensing the urgency and the finality, and asked no further, probing questions. There are several robust legal options, Evelyn. We should discuss the specific advantages and potential pitfalls of each. For the next intense hour, we discuss the intricacies of irrevocable trusts, the precise legal definitions of financial power of attorney, and the specific contingent provisions to be included in my revised last will and testament. Francis took voluminous notes, explaining the complex legal nuances with patience and clarity. I felt a strangely exhilarating sense of total, autonomous control over these crucial decisions. By the time our meeting concluded, my phone, which I had deliberately reactivated for emergency calls only, showed an astonishing 23 missed calls from Scott, 11 from Tiffany, and 4 frantic texts from Jonathan, though, notably, not a single one from Samantha. I will have all the complex paperwork fully drafted and ready for your final signature by the close of the week, Francis confirmed as he personally escorted me to the door. The sooner, the better, Francis, I replied decisively. And Francis, thank you. He nodded, completely understanding the unspoken gravity of the moment. You know, Evelyn, George always told me you were quietly stronger than you looked. I am truly glad to see he was, as always, correct. I walked out of the office and onto the busy, sunlit pavement with a tiny, utterly genuine smile playing on my lips. George, he had always seen the true, resilient core of me, even when I had forgotten it existed. On the long drive back to my quiet neighborhood, I made an unscheduled stop at the large, impersonal supermarket. For the first time in an age, I bought groceries solely for myself, meticulously selecting items without factoring in Scott's notoriously fussy preferences or Jonathan's latest, trend-driven snack cravings. It was a strange, yet profoundly comforting feeling to think purely and selfishly of my own culinary desires and needs. A sudden, unexpected surprise awaited me the moment I pulled into my driveway. Samantha was sitting patiently on the front porch steps, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her knees, a small, solitary figure. She immediately jumped up when she saw my car, her face a mixture of relief and obvious concern. "Grandma." She rushed toward me, immediately taking the heaviest of the grocery bags. "I've been repeatedly calling you all day long. Why weren't you answering your phone?" I looked carefully at my granddaughter. Samantha was the spitting image of me at her age, the exact same shade of thoughtful brown hair, the same deeply stubborn furrow between her eyebrows that appeared whenever she was worried or deeply concentrating. "I had a rather demanding day, my dear," I replied, unlocking the front door. "Come in, please, and tell me everything that is going on." We moved into the familiar comfort of the kitchen. Samantha sat down at the large wooden table, her slender fingers tapping a nervous, quick rhythm on the countertop while I calmly put away the perishable items. "Grandma, what exactly is happening?" she whispered, her voice tight with genuine distress. "Dad is absolutely frantic. He keeps shouting that you've blocked every single payment and that you refuse to answer his calls. He sounds terrifying." I calmly filled the kettle with water and placed it on the stove before answering. "It is entirely true, Samantha. I have made the definite decision to cease all financial support to your immediate family." Samantha's face instantly paled, the color draining completely. "What?" "That's impossible. Dad was adamant all week about how critically important it was that you attend tonight's dinner." "I have the definitive message, Samantha." I pulled out my phone and held the screen up for her to read Scott's cruel, final text. Samantha immediately covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes instantly filling with tears. "Oh my God, Grandma. I truly had no idea. I swear it. That is absolutely awful. I can't even begin to comprehend how he could write something so vile." I gently placed a cup of freshly brewed tea in front of her. That message, Samantha, was simply the last, final straw. For so many years, I have covered every expense, from this new house to Jonathan's ridiculously expensive tennis lessons. And through all that time, I gradually came to realize I was being systematically used. Yesterday, I received the absolute, non-negotiable confirmation of that devastating truth. Samantha remained silent, staring intently into the surface of her tea. Then she looked up, her expression mournful but comprehending. "You know, Grandma, I have always seen it. I've seen how they rely on your amazing kindness, especially Mom." I tried to talk to Dad about it once, but he always vehemently defended her actions. I nodded slowly. Deep down, I had always known that Samantha understood much more than her careful exterior allowed her to show. "So, what will happen now, Grandma?" she asked quietly, nervously stirring her tea. "I mean, they have so many massive payments due, the mortgages, the loans. They will simply have to learn to manage completely on their own," I said, offering a small, resolute shrug. "They are both capable, well-educated adults with very good jobs. Scott is a senior planning inspector. Your mother is an incredibly successful, highly paid realtor. They will be just fine." The phone, resting on the counter, rang again. "Scott." I silenced the call with a curt, definitive movement. "Are you truly not going to answer it, Grandma?" Samantha asked, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Not today," I shook my head firmly. "I need significant time to reconcile my feelings, and he requires an equally significant amount of time to fully comprehend the devastating consequences of his actions and his words." Samantha looked at me, a thoughtful, surprised expression on her face. "Grandma, I have honestly never seen you so utterly determined before." I allowed myself a fleeting, weak smile. I hadn't seen myself like this in decades. We finished our tea in a comfortable, easy silence, a much-needed emotional reprieve. When Samantha finally prepared to leave, she offered me a hug that was noticeably tighter, more prolonged than usual. "Are you really okay? Are you sure you don't want me to stay the night?" "I am perfectly, entirely fine, my dear." I gently stroked her cheek. "Go on home now, and please do not worry about me." She nodded, but stopped abruptly at the threshold. "Grandma, I want you to know I am absolutely not taking sides in this conflict. You understand that, don't you?" "Of course I do." I smiled warmly. "This entire, unpleasant matter is strictly between me and your parents. It has nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with you. After Samantha had driven away, a profound, deep silence descended once again on the house. I checked my mail. There, nestled amongst the circulars, was a stark notice of a completely failed credit card charge addressed to Jonathan. That fast? Apparently, my 23-year-old grandson was already living dangerously close to his financial limits. I set the letter aside and walked over to my armchair by the window. My phone continued its frantic, electronic protests, vibrating intermittently with new messages and desperate missed calls, but I chose to completely ignore it. Instead, I pulled out that old photo album and opened it to a random, forgotten page. A picture from 20 years ago. George and me, a much younger Scott and Tiffany, and tiny Jonathan and Samantha posed awkwardly at a family picnic. Everyone was smiling, genuinely happy. When exactly did everything change so horribly? When did loving, voluntary support transform into a bitter, expected obligation? When did their love for me tragically mutate into a naked expectation of perpetual financial assistance? I closed the album with a decisive snap and walked over to the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me looked undeniably tired, her face etched with 83 years of worry. But there was a new, dangerous spark in her eyes, a resolute determination I hadn't seen since the early days of my marriage. "It's time to finally remember who you truly are, Evelyn Hawthorne," I instructed my reflection, the words a silent, binding vow. The doorbell's sudden, cheerful ring violently interrupted my profound introspection. My heart immediately gave a startled, hard jump. Was it Scott already? I walked slowly to the door and carefully peered through the tiny spy hole. Lorraine Campbell, my oldest and dearest friend, stood on the doorstep, a generous wicker basket cradled in her arms. "Evelyn." She embraced me tightly the moment I opened the door. "I called so many times, but you simply weren't answering. I thought I would take a chance and stop by. I wanted to make absolutely certain you were all right. Come in, Lorraine." I stepped aside, letting her enter. "I apologize. I purposefully turned my phone off. Just a small, sudden family emergency that needed definitive handling." Lorraine placed the basket carefully on the table, homemade shortbread cookies, and a jar of her famous spiced fig jam. "Family trouble," she repeated, her gaze sharp and penetrating. "Tiffany again?" Lorraine had never once tried to conceal her low opinion of my daughter-in-law. "A complete predator, Evelyn always has been," she'd often declared. "Worse than Tiffany, actually. It was Scott this time." I quickly recounted the humiliating text message from the night before and the momentous, life-altering decision I had made in the aftermath. Lorraine listened intently, without interruption, her expression changing from concern to understanding. When I finally finished the brief, sanitized account, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand firmly. "At last," she exclaimed, a wave of such profound, unexpected relief in her voice that I couldn't help but genuinely smile for the first time that day. "I am so sorry, Evelyn, but I have witnessed their exploitation of you for years. How many times I wanted to intervene and tell you enough was enough, but I knew it was absolutely none of my business." "I know," I sighed, the weight of years of deliberate ignorance returning for a brief moment. "You were completely right all along. I simply refused to open my eyes and see the ugly truth." "So, what's the immediate next step?" Lorraine asked, pouring us both the coffee she had thoughtfully brought in her thermos. "Scott must be in an absolute frenzy by now." "Let him be frantic," I shrugged dismissively. "I need time to completely sort through my feelings, and they, I believe, need a crucial, necessary interval to fully comprehend the full magnitude of what their greed has actually cost them." We spent the rest of the darkening afternoon and evening talking easily, honestly. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I wasn't being defined by the limiting roles of a mother or a grandmother, but simply as a woman engaged in a deep, liberating conversation with her oldest friend. It was profoundly freeing. By the time Lorraine reluctantly left, the early October evening had turned completely dark. I finally decided to check my phone, prepared for the inevitable. 37 missed calls. 23 increasingly desperate text messages. I began to scroll through them, my lips curling slightly at the rapidly shifting tone, which spiraled quickly from feigned confusion to outright demanding desperation. Mom, what in God's name is going on? Why isn't the mortgage payment going through? I have an immediate alert from the bank. Evelyn, this is Tiffany. We absolutely must talk. This is an urgent, critical situation. Grandma, my credit card is completely blocked. I'm totally stranded downtown without a penny. The final text message from Scott, sent only 10 short minutes ago, was ominous and curt. Mom, I'm leaving the house now. I'm coming to see you. We need to talk. This cannot wait. I felt every muscle in my body immediately tense. Was I truly prepared for this immediate, explosive confrontation? But it was immediately clear that the choice was no longer mine. I quickly turned off the living room light and retreated to the kitchen, placing the kettle back on the burner. I pulled out my very best porcelain teacup, the exquisite one I typically reserved only for the most profoundly special occasions. Today, I realized with a grim smile, was definitely a special occasion, the day Evelyn Hawthorne had finally, definitively, said no. I heard the ominous, telltale sound of a luxury sedan pulling up the driveway and glanced out the window. Scott. He was alone, without Tiffany. That was a rare, almost unprecedented anomaly. Tiffany usually insisted on controlling every single important negotiation. The doorbell, a demanding, angry sound, rang the sharp, unavoidable signal for the battle to begin. I inhaled deeply, consciously squared my shoulders, and walked with slow, deliberate steps to open the front door. Scott stood on my doorstep, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, his expensive shirt visibly crumpled, his eyes a dangerous, desperate mixture of panic and raw, genuine irritation. I silently stepped aside, allowing him to enter my house. Mom, what in God's name is happening? Scott didn't waste a single moment on civilities or greetings. All our recurring payments have been rejected instantly. The bank is warning us you've canceled every authorization. We can't pay the mortgage. I walked slowly, deliberately, into the kitchen, where the kettle was already letting off a soft, promising plume of steam. Do you care for a cup of tea, Scott? I asked, my voice flat, unnervingly calm, as I reached for a second cup. The contrast between his raw panic and my detached composure was the only defense I needed. Tea? Tea? Scott threw his hands up in a dramatic, despairing gesture. Do you even remotely understand the magnitude of the disaster we are facing? The bank called just minutes ago about the missed payment. Tiffany is absolutely hysterical. I poured the boiling water into the teapot, watching the dark liquid steep, before finally turning back to my son. I understand perfectly, Scott. I have terminated every single financial obligation to your family. All 189 payments. And let me be absolutely clear, I have zero intention of reinstating them. Scott froze mid-sentence, his jaw slack, as if his brain was simply refusing to process the gravity of what I had just said. What? Why? Is this some kind of terrible sick joke? He slumped heavily into a chair, his eyes fixed on my face, searching for a sign of weakness, a flicker of surrender. You weren't invited to dinner. My wife explicitly asked that you not be here tonight. She's tired of your passive-aggressive presence. I quoted his message back to him, verbatim, watching the color rapidly drain from his face. That was a message from you, Scott. Not a joke. And my response to that act of sheer cruelty is equally non-negotiable. He went dangerously pale, lowering his head, avoiding my gaze. That text? It's not what you think, Mom, he stammered, attempting to recover. I admit it was stupid, regrettable. Tiffany was incredibly stressed, high-strung, and you decided the best, fastest way to placate your demanding wife was to publicly insult your own mother, the very woman who financially secures your entire, opulent existence. I finished the damning sentence for him. That is utterly charming, Scott. Truly. Mom, please, he pleaded, a sickeningly desperate, wheedling tone entering his voice. We are simply incapable of functioning without your established help. We have the mortgage, the numerous loans. Jonathan's final tuition payment is due next month. I took a long, slow sip of my tea, feeling a satisfying, slow-burning fire of long-suppressed anger finally being permitted to escape. Didn't you ever once consider these critical financial obligations when you decided to deny me even the most fundamental human respect? When Tiffany openly criticized my wardrobe, my house, my life. When Jonathan conveniently forgot to attend my last 2 birthday celebrations. When neither you nor your wife called me on the anniversary of your father's passing. Scott looked genuinely ashamed, a fleeting, almost imperceptible expression. But beneath the surface, I saw a familiar flicker of sharp irritation. He had always been a deeply ineffective actor. Mom, we truly value everything you have done for us. We honestly do. He tried to project sincerity. It's just that sometimes there are these minor misunderstandings. We all love you, Mom, even Tiffany, despite the fact that she is not always adept at showing it. I looked across the table at my son, a man in his 50s, a father of 2, who now looked exactly like a small boy caught red-handed stealing from the cookie jar. Scott, I don't believe you, I said, my voice quiet, cutting, and perfectly level. I no longer believe you love me. You love my assets, my financial aid, my relentless, unquestioning willingness to constantly extinguish your endless crises. But you do not fundamentally love me. That is a monstrous lie. He instantly leaped out of his chair, indignant and defensive. How dare you even suggest such a thing? Because it is the devastating, absolute truth, I remained seated, maintaining my chilling composure. When was the last, honest time you called me simply to inquire about my health? To ask about my life, my simple thoughts? To invite me over for no grand reason, not when you desperately needed a financial transfusion or free babysitting. Scott opened his mouth, searching frantically for a viable defense, but found absolutely none. His silence was the most eloquent admission I could have hoped for. I pressed my advantage. Your father always warned me, you can't, under any circumstances, buy genuine love. I foolishly didn't listen to his wisdom. I thought if I was just generous enough, helpful enough, financially reliable enough, you would somehow appreciate the source of your comfort. I was horribly wrong. Mom, Scott took a stumbling step toward me. I fully understand you are deeply hurt and upset. Why don't you allow Tiffany and me to come over this coming weekend? We can discuss this calmly, rationally, like adults. No. I firmly shook my head. That is entirely unnecessary. My final decision stands. It is irrevocable. But how are we supposed to pay for the house? The pure, raw panic in his voice was sickeningly evident. The cars, the utility bills, Jonathan's exorbitant tuition. You both possess high-paying, executive-level jobs, Scott. Tiffany is a top-tier realtor. You will figure it out. Like all other capable adults in the world. His face, which had been contorted in fear, now hardened with unconcealed, hot anger. You simply cannot do this to us. After everything you what? I instantly stood up, facing him directly. What exactly have you done for me, Scott? Name a single act of genuine, unselfish kindness you performed for me in the last 5 years, expecting absolutely nothing in return. He remained mute, his eyes darting frantically, desperately trying to catalog the recent years, searching for even one isolated example. His profound, guilt-ridden silence spoke louder than any accusation I could level. You see, I sighed, the anger now replaced by a quiet, profound disappointment. You cannot even fabricate one example. This isn't fair, Mom. He retreated a step, completely cornered. You are embarrassing me. Embarrassing you? I managed a dry, humorless grin. What measure of public humiliation did you expose me to by sending that vile text, by banning me from the house, and by revoking my invitation to the family dinner? Scott ran a shaking hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I instantly recognized from his awkward teenage years. It was a mistake, Mom, a heat-of-the-moment error. I have apologized for it already. What exactly do you want from me? To grovel? To get down on my knees and beg? I want you to leave. Immediately, I replied, my voice quiet, final, and razor-sharp. I require time to fully process the last 50 years of this relationship. When and if I am ever prepared to have a genuine conversation, one that is strictly about you and me, not money, I will initiate the contact. But, Mom, Go now, Scott. My tone was quiet, but it carried a force that surprised even me. He stared at me for a few long seconds, a look of profound, genuine disbelief that I was actually physically ejecting him from my home. Then, without uttering another word, he silently turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the deafening, definitive slam of the front door, followed by the roar of his high-powered engine reversing violently down the driveway. Only when the sound had completely faded into the stillness of the evening did I allow myself to sink back into the chair and let out a long, ragged exhale. My hands were visibly shaking. Confronting my son directly was exponentially harder than I had mentally prepared for. A familiar, deeply ingrained part of me, the old, compliant Evelyn, frantically wanted to run after him, to call him, to tell him I would immediately give it all back just so he wouldn't be angry or hurt. But I didn't. Instead, I finished the now cold tea and began to meticulously wash the used dishes. I needed the mechanical, repetitive motion to calm my frantically racing mind. The phone rang. Tiffany. I rejected the call with a curt press of the screen. Less than a minute later, a text appeared. Evelyn, we need to talk. Scott told me about your conversation. I strongly believe this is a terrible, simple misunderstanding. Let's discuss this rationally, like true adults. I snorted a dry, bitter laugh. Like adults. Tiffany always loved that phrase, especially when she was attempting to project authority and subtle superiority. I did not bother to respond. The following morning began with the expected, yet still unsettling, arrival of Francis Whitaker, my astute attorney. He brought the necessary papers to officially sign my new last will and testament and the irrevocable trust deed. It is completely filed and ready, Evelyn. He laid the intimidating stack of documents out on the kitchen table. As per our specific instructions, the vast bulk of your entire estate is now legally placed into an irrevocable trust, with you personally designated as the sole beneficiary for the remainder of your life. Upon your passing, the assets will be precisely distributed according to your final, written instructions, 40% to Samantha, 10% to a local library support charity, and the remainder allocated to your discretion. I meticulously reviewed every page, every complex clause. Scott and Jonathan were legally restricted to receive only the minimum required statutory shares of the estate. Tiffany received absolutely nothing. This is exactly correct, I nodded, signing each sheet with a firm, practiced hand. Francis watched me, a slight, almost approving smile on his face. You know, Evelyn, in all my 30-plus years of practicing estate law, I have rarely witnessed such a swift, dramatic revision of a will. Most clients dither. They doubt themselves. I have spent more than enough time doubting, Francis. I signed the very last page with a definitive flourish. For years, he conceded, gathering up the freshly signed documents. I will file these final documents with the court this afternoon. You will receive certified copies by the end of the week. And Evelyn, he paused at the door, his expression turning serious once more. If you require any legal representation whatsoever for any resulting conflicts with your family, you know I am instantly at your service. After Francis departed, I decided I needed to get out of the house. It was a beautiful, crisp day, and the cool, fresh air helped to momentarily clear the remaining fog from my mind. I walked toward the neighborhood park where George and I had spent so many peaceful, unburdened weekends. Taking a seat on a familiar, worn wooden bench, I watched the young children and their attentive parents playing. A young woman patiently helping her tiny son construct an elaborate sandcastle caught my eye. She was laughing freely with him as the entire fragile structure suddenly collapsed. I remembered performing that exact, universal maternal ritual with Scott decades ago. Where and when had we lost that simple, easy joy of being together? My quiet reflections were shattered by the shrill ring of my phone. Jonathan's number. I hesitated, but decided to answer. Grandma? His voice was tense, strained. Is it really true? Did you actually cancel every single payment? Hello, Jonathan. I consciously kept my voice calm, neutral. Yes, that is completely true. But why? He sounded utterly, genuinely baffled. What happened? Dad wouldn't tell me. He just kept yelling something about a misunderstanding over a stupid text message. Jonathan spoke quickly, desperately. Grandma, my credit card is completely blocked. I can't pay my rent. I'm going to be evicted next month. I sighed, a long, weary sound. Jonathan had always been utterly direct, going straight to the core of the problem, how it immediately affected him. Jonathan, you are 23 years old. You have been working for a successful insurance company for nearly 2 years now. Why exactly are you still financially dependent on my checks? He hesitated, clearly embarrassed. Well, I guess I just got used to it. You were always just there for me. Exactly, I interrupted him, the statement heavy with years of resignation. You all got used to it. You took my reliable help as an absolute entitlement. You never stopped to consider how I felt when your father sent me a message telling me I was completely unwelcome in the very house I was financially sustaining. There was a prolonged, heavy silence on the line. Did Dad actually write that? Jonathan finally asked, a genuine note of incredulity in his voice. Yes, he did. I didn't soften the blow or attempt to make it easier for him. And that was the final, non-negotiable straw, Jonathan. For years, I supported your family. I paid for your house, your various luxury cars, your expensive education, even your absurd tennis club membership. And what was the return on that massive investment? Neglect, disrespect, and grudging, formal visits on required holidays. Grandma, He stammered again, utterly lost for words. I truly didn't realize you felt this way. Because none of you ever bothered to ask, I said, without anger, simply stating an absolute fact. You just took and took, without ever thinking about my needs or my feelings. Silence again, then a quiet, desperate question. So what happens to me now? Now you will have to deal with it completely on your own, I said, my voice calm, like all self-sufficient adults are required to do. But Grandma, I have to go, Jonathan. I cut him off. Take some time. Think deeply about everything I have said and how you have all chosen to treat me over these years. I ended the call and remained seated for a long time, watching the park. The conversation with Jonathan had left me with a strange, conflicting emotion, a deep sadness at realizing how painfully transactional our relationship had been, but a powerful relief that I had finally, truthfully, spoken my mind. The rest of the evening reading the complex psychological thriller I had put off for so long, the kind of book that demands total mental focus, distracting my mind from the raw, lingering anxiety of the day's confrontations. Before retreating to bed, I checked my phone again, a necessary, clinical act. A few more desperate, pleading missed calls from Scott and Tiffany. A solitary, heartfelt text from Samantha. Grandma, the house is chaos. My parents are constantly fighting. Jonathan is in a sheer panic about money. Are you truly okay? May I please come over tomorrow, even for a short visit? I immediately replied, a comforting firmness in my tone. Yes, my dear. I would absolutely love to see you. I am perfectly fine, thank you. Samantha was my one, true, emotional sanctuary, the only relationship in that family orbit that didn't feel like a complicated, debt-ridden balance sheet. The next morning brought the inevitable and, frankly, highly anticipated surprise. Tiffany was standing right on my doorstep, a figure of impeccable composure, dressed in a sleek, neutral-tone designer suit with her hair perfectly styled, a predator meticulously grooming her feathers for the hunt. In her perfectly manicured hands, she held a conspicuous, beribboned box of exquisite cakes from the most notoriously expensive pastry shop in the city. Evelyn, good morning, she chirped, handing me the decadent box with a manufactured smile that didn't quite reach her cold, calculating eyes. May I come inside for just a moment? We truly need to clear up this mess. I stepped aside silently, granting her passage, immediately assessing her chosen strategy. Was this going to be the passive-aggressive guilt trip or the smooth, professional negotiation? Tiffany glided into the living room, instantly performing her usual, quick, assessing look around the space, the familiar, appraising glance that always made my blood run cold and my fists clench in anticipation. Evelyn, she began, perching delicately on the very edge of the sofa, her hands folded neatly, defensively, in her lap. I truly believe there has been a terrible, deep misunderstanding here. Oh, really, Tiffany? I sat down in my own armchair, pointedly across from her, offering neither a cup of tea nor any pretense of comfort. Garrett, Scott, should never have sent that awful, unprofessional message. She shook her head with a studied expression of genuine regret, the performance already in full swing. It was an entirely emotional, stress-induced reaction. We were under immense pressure with work, trying to manage the dinner preparations. Tiffany, let us not waste either of our valuable time, I interrupted her, cutting the dramatic monologue short. You are not here to apologize. You are here solely for the money. Her professionally crafted smile momentarily wavered, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her features, but she quickly reestablished the facade. Evelyn, that is simply unfair. I am genuinely and deeply sorry for the incident. We all appreciate your financial help and unwavering support. You are a critical, essential part of our family structure. So essential that you didn't want me seated at your prestigious table. I asked, my voice calm, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. Tiffany let out an exasperated sigh, an obvious display of a highly intelligent woman patiently explaining elementary physics to a confused child. That particular evening was special, Evelyn. We had incredibly important guests, potential clients, the elite of my industry. I needed every detail to be absolutely flawless. And just know, how critically important this is for my career advancement. And I, apparently, would have ruined that flawless event. I raised a skeptical, heavily aged eyebrow. With what exactly? My comfortable, unfashionable clothes? An accidentally inappropriate comment? My old-fashioned presence? That is absolutely not what I meant, she insisted, pursing her thin lips, the strain beginning to show around her eyes. Evelyn, let's just be two rational adults. You and I have always had a complicated relationship, but that is no sane reason to deliberately dismantle and destroy the entire family unit. Scott is desperate, truly desperate. Jonathan cannot pay his vital bills. We are in imminent danger of losing the house. The house that I paid for, I reminded her, quietly but sharply. Which you helped contribute to, she corrected me instantly, the realtor's instinct for claiming value instantly overriding her diplomatic facade. We invested a substantial amount of our own capital as well. I looked at this stunning, relentlessly confident woman, a woman who was perfectly accustomed to getting everything she ruthlessly pursued. She had been a part of my family for 25 relentless years, yet I had never once felt a flicker of genuine warmth or connection to her. Tiffany, I leaned forward slightly, emphasizing my stillness. I will no longer finance your life, your aspirations, or your lifestyle. Not the house, not the luxury cars, not Jonathan's tuition, not even the excessive club fees. Nothing. This is my absolute, non-negotiable final decision. Her face visibly transformed. The mask of practiced, professional friendliness instantly dropped away, revealing the cold, hard, unyielding calculation that I had always sensed lurking just beneath the surface of her persistent smiles. You absolutely cannot do this to us, her voice hardened, losing all pretense of warmth. After everything we have sacrificially done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Tiffany? I asked with a surprising, genuine curiosity. Please elaborate. She stammered, clearly thrown off balance, utterly unprepared for such a direct, devastating question. We included you in our prestigious family unit. We allowed you to be an integral part of your grandchildren's lives. We provided care and stability for you. Provided care? I couldn't help but emit a short, raw, bitter laugh. When was the last time you called me simply to inquire about my health, to bring me a meal, or to ask me over just to talk, not to ask for another check or to request a favor? Tiffany immediately stood up, her face tight, white with simmering anger. You are going to bitterly regret this, Evelyn. We are the only family connection you have left. Who exactly will care for you when you are too frail to live on your own? I will care for myself, Tiffany. I stood up as well, meeting her gaze evenly. Just as I took care of myself for most of my life before I started pouring all my energy and George's capital into your rapaciously demanding family. She stalked toward the door, but stopped dramatically on the threshold, turning back with a snarl. This is not over, Evelyn. Scott won't just let it go. He is your son, and he has specific legal rights. Rights to what, Tiffany? I calmly asked, tapping the side of my head. My financial assets? I shook my head, denying her premise. Go now. And do not dare return until you have mastered the most basic concept of human respect. After Tiffany's explosive departure, I felt a strange, profound sense of emotional emptiness. It was as if the final, draining scene of an agonizing play had been executed. The curtain had fallen, and the self-serving actors had finally dispersed. I walked to the window. The day was crisp, clear, and perfectly sunny. Life was proceeding normally outside. Neighbors were gardening. Children were riding their bikes. The letter carrier was making his rounds. My gaze fell upon the kitchen table, where the still-wrapped box of expensive cakes lay untouched, a pathetic, failed bribe. Before, I would have immediately panicked, fearing missed deadlines and letting my family down. Now, I felt nothing but utter control. I could pay my own bills whenever I felt like it. I could buy myself a completely new, expensive wardrobe without worrying if I had enough cash remaining to cover Jonathan's latest sporting whim. I could finally, enroll in that advanced watercolor painting class I had longed for years ago. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was truly, beautifully free. Free from the constant, crushing obligation, free from the corrosive, internal guilt, free from the nonstop need to sacrifice my own deepest desires for the insatiable demands of others. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Lorraine's number. Lorraine, do you recall mentioning that hiking trip to the Rocky Mountains next month? I asked when she answered. I would very much like to join you, provided the invitation is still open. Evelyn. I could hear the sheer, joyful surprise in her voice. Of course, we would be ecstatic to have you. But I genuinely thought you wouldn't be able to because of. I can now, I smiled into the phone. I have absolutely no obligations holding me back anymore. After my conversation with Lorraine, I found an old, worn leather notebook and began creating a list. A list of crucial things to see, places to visit, and simple things I desperately wanted to do, things I had constantly postponed because there were always more important things. Scott's needs, Tiffany's relentless wants, Jonathan's fleeting whims. Now it was unequivocally my time, Evelyn Hawthorne's time, and I was resolutely planning to use every single precious moment of it. The phone rang again, Scott. I firmly rejected the call. I had far more important, self-serving things to plan today. A surprising, unnerving silence descended for 2 full weeks. I had fully expected Scott and Tiffany to immediately escalate their attempts, to try every psychological trick in the book to reverse my financial edict. But after my daughter-in-law's dramatic, failed visit, there was only a profound, disorienting quiet. They never called again. They never showed up unannounced. Only Samantha stopped by twice, brief, supportive visits where we tacitly agreed to completely avoid the subject of the escalating family drama. The morning of the third Tuesday was bright, bathed in clear, promising sunshine. I sipped my coffee slowly, luxuriously, on the veranda, casually flipping through a glossy, exotic travel catalog. The mountain trip with Lorraine was confirmed for next month, but why stop there? Why not plan something far more ambitious? I had only ever seen Europe, the birthplace of high culture and ancient history, in books and films. George had always harbored a dream of showing me Italy, the ancestral home of his mother's family. We had been slowly saving for that monumental trip for our retirement, but when the time finally arrived, his failing health made the journey impossible. I turned the glossy pages, lingering over pictures of Rome, Florence, and the canals of Venice, instantly imagining myself there, camera in hand, wearing a comfortable pair of walking shoes, completely free from the relentless pressure to rush home to attend to the grandchildren or to solve Scott's newest, self-inflicted financial crisis. The doorbell's polite, friendly chime interrupted my reverie. Lorraine stood on the doorstep, a large, enticing wicker basket resting on her hip. "Good morning, fellow traveler." She smiled broadly as she stepped inside. I brought fresh, warm croissants from the new French bakery and a generous portion of the juiciest neighborhood gossip. I laughed genuinely as I led her back to the veranda. What better way to spend a Tuesday morning? We settled comfortably. Lorraine poured the coffee from her thermos and offered me a croissant that was still deliciously warm. "So," she said, taking a satisfying bite of the pastry. "How's your new, beautifully free life progressing?" "Unaccustomed," I admitted readily. Sometimes I wake up with this immediate, sharp feeling that I've forgotten some critically important task. And then I remember that the only person I now have to care for is Evelyn Hawthorne. Lorraine nodded with profound understanding. "That is entirely normal, my dear. You spent far too long living exclusively for the needs of others. Your spirit isn't yet acclimated to the complete absence of stress." She was quiet for a brief moment, then added, her tone becoming slightly more serious. "I happened to see Tiffany at the market yesterday. She was buying dried beans and generic pasta, absolutely none of the usual delicacies she is so accustomed to." I raised a curious eyebrow. "Indeed? And how did she look, Lorraine?" "Not flawless, certainly not her usual self." Lorraine shrugged indifferently. Her hair was slightly disheveled. Her clothing was markedly plainer. She didn't notice me, and I certainly didn't feel compelled to say hello. I attempted, with difficulty, to picture Tiffany without her usual high-gloss perfection. My daughter-in-law had always looked as though she had just effortlessly stepped off the cover of a high-fashion magazine. "I suppose they are finally learning to tighten their belts," I mused, a quiet satisfaction in my tone. "And high time, too," Lorraine exclaimed with a sudden, forceful passion. "Evelyn, I watched them exploit you for years. Especially that woman. She never once truly appreciated your generous spirit or your infinite patience." I sighed. "I know. It's just strange to realize they might actually be struggling financially. Scott has always been notoriously bad with saving money." "Then it is time he finally, brutally learned that crucial lesson." Lorraine cut me off. "He is well into his 50s. He should be standing firmly on his own, not still clinging desperately to his mother's skirt." I couldn't help but smile at my friend's blunt, unwavering honesty. Lorraine always spoke her unvarnished mind without ever attempting to soften the impact. That was precisely why we had remained such close friends for so long. Speaking of new lives, Lorraine gestured toward the travel catalog on the table. "What are you studying so intently?" "I am seriously considering a trip to Italy." I slid the catalog over to her. "George always wanted to show me Rome." Lorraine positively glowed. "That is a magnificent idea. When are you seriously thinking of going?" "Perhaps in the early autumn," I mused. "I still need to meticulously plan everything and prepare." "Why wait that long? Why not sooner?" Lorraine flipped through the pages with enthusiasm. "June is absolutely perfect for Italy, not suffocatingly hot yet, but warm enough for all the walking and sightseeing." I found myself genuinely wondering what, precisely, was still holding me back. Previously, there had always been a dozen urgent, plausible reasons for delay: childcare, being on emergency call for Scott's next self-inflicted financial crisis, or avoiding spending money on myself when the family might suddenly need help. Those reasons were now irrevocably gone. "You know, Lorraine, you're absolutely right." I smiled, a completely genuine, free-flowing smile. "Why on earth not? I will call the agency this afternoon." Lorraine nodded, looking entirely pleased. Now that is the sound of a woman finally making the right decision. "And you know what else?" I added, an idea sparking in my mind. "If you are looking for company, I would love for you to join me. Italy has been prominently on your bucket list for years." We spent the rest of the morning eagerly discussing possible itineraries and the sights we absolutely had to see. For the first time in an age, I felt a genuine, thrilling sense of anticipation for something new and profoundly exciting. When Lorraine finally left, I immediately called the travel agency and scheduled a detailed consultation for the following day. Then I pulled out the enormous, leather-bound atlas George had given me decades ago and began to study the physical map of Italy, mentally inserting myself into those exotic, promised locations. The doorbell rang again, interrupting my intense focus. I opened it and saw Jonathan. He was disheveled, wearing a noticeably crumpled shirt, with dark, heavy circles under his eyes, a man who had clearly not slept well in weeks. "Grandma," he shuffled awkwardly on my doormat. "May I please come inside?" I silently stepped aside, letting him pass. Jonathan walked tentatively into the living room and sank onto the sofa, nervously rubbing his hands together. Would you like some tea? I offered, the ritual of hospitality kicking in. No, thanks, he shook his head quickly. Grandma, I really need your help. I sat down across from him, keeping my expression perfectly calm, utterly noncommittal. What specific kind of help do you require, Jonathan? He took a deep, shuddering breath, as if bracing to jump into dangerously cold water. Money, Grandma. I desperately need cash. My credit card is totally blocked. The bank is demanding immediate payment. I cannot pay my rent, my car insurance. I am completely, utterly screwed, pardon the language. I looked at my grandson, a man who now looked like a lost, terrified child. Jonathan had always been spoiled, first by Scott and Tiffany, then by my own constant, enabling generosity. He had never, in his entire 23 years, had to genuinely fight for a single thing. How much exactly do you owe the bank, Jonathan? I asked, my voice calm, the perfect contrast to his rising panic. $7,000? He lowered his eyes, shame palpable. I got a little carried away with the credit cards over the past few months. I thought the money would always just be there. What exactly did you spend that much money on, Jonathan? I asked him calmly, patiently. He fidgeted, shrugging his shoulders, still refusing to meet my gaze. Just various things, Grandma. A new, necessary smartphone model, a spontaneous trip to the coast with a few friends, a couple of expensive weekend parties. I maintained a deliberate, unsettling silence, giving him ample time to continue, to genuinely confess, to show a flicker of self-awareness. Jonathan finally looked up, his expression strained and desperate. Grandma, I know I haven't been particularly attentive to you. I haven't called enough. I haven't visited much, and I truly, truly love you, and I am genuinely begging you to help me now. I promise, I swear I will pay you back every single cent. I studied him intently, searching for a single kernel of sincerity behind those carefully rehearsed, pleading words. Jonathan had always possessed a natural, easy charm when he desperately required something, a manipulative trait he had clearly inherited and perfected from his mother, Tiffany. Jonathan, I finally spoke, my voice a quiet blend of disappointment and firm resolve. You are 23 years old. You've been working professionally for a successful insurance company for nearly 2 years now. Why have you still failed to master the most fundamental skill, managing your own finances? He looked away, clearly ashamed. I honestly don't know, Grandma. I never had to think about it, not really. I could always just ask my parents, or I could always ask you. Exactly, I nodded slowly, the realization a heavy weight between us. There was always a safety net, always someone immediately available to solve your self-inflicted crises. But Jonathan, this cannot, absolutely cannot, continue forever. Sooner or later, every single person must learn to stand decisively on their own feet. I know, Grandma, he quickly, enthusiastically agreed. And I will learn. I promise. Just please, help me this one last time. I'll get an extra job. I'll save every dime. I'll be different. I shook my head, a slow, final movement. No, Jonathan. I will not give you any money. His face immediately stretched in disbelief, morphing into genuine shock. He had clearly, devastatingly, not anticipated a blunt rejection. But Grandma, what in God's name am I supposed to do now? Do what responsible adults do when they find themselves in a precarious financial situation, I calmly advised. You must look for a sustainable solution. Speak directly to the bank about restructuring your debt. Find an immediate, additional source of income. Drastically cut back on every unnecessary expense. Jonathan stared at me, his eyes wide, as if I were speaking an ancient, incomprehensible language. But it's all so complicated. The paperwork, the stress. Life itself is complicated, I shrugged, the truth undeniably sharp, especially when you are finally forced to accept responsibility for your own actions and decisions. He abruptly jumped up, and I could clearly see a furious progression of emotions on his young face, disbelief, sharp resentment, and finally, pure, unadulterated anger. So you're just abandoning me after all these years of telling me you love me? I love you, Jonathan. I remained perfectly calm, utterly unruffled by his outburst. And precisely because I love you, I refuse to continue supporting your harmful addiction to my money. That isn't genuine love. That is destructive codependency. And it is ultimately hurting you far more than it ever helped you. That is a despicable lie. He shook his head violently, desperately. You're just trying to punish us all because of some stupid fight you had with Dad. I looked at my furious grandson and saw in his immediate, violent reaction a perfect reflection of Tiffany, the same volatile reaction to rejection, the same complete inability to accept a clear no as a final answer. Jonathan, please, sit down, I commanded, my voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. To my genuine surprise, he instantly obeyed, collapsing back onto the sofa. I am not seeking revenge against anyone, I stated the quiet truth. I have simply made the decision to permanently stop being an ATM for my family. I have ceased buying the love, the respect, and the familial attention that should have always been given freely and unconditionally. I paused, allowing the gravity of my words to sink into his clearly struggling mind. Think about this carefully, Jonathan. When was the last time you came to see me just for genuine enjoyment, without any financial request or need? When did you ever show any real interest in my life, my health, or my feelings? Jonathan remained silent, his gaze fixed firmly on the carpet. You can't recall a single instance, can you? I sighed softly. That, Jonathan, is the profound problem. Our entire relationship regrettably devolved long ago into a transactional arrangement. I provide the money, and you, your parents, and your brother pretend to genuinely care about me. That is not a functional family. It is a cynical business deal. Not true, he shook his head, though the defiance was noticeably weaker this time. We do care about you. Do you truly? I raised a skeptical eyebrow. Name one thing you have personally done for me unselfishly, one true gesture of care, in the last year. Jonathan hesitated, his forehead furrowed with the extreme effort of memory. I could practically see his mind frantically sifting through the last 12 months, searching for a single phone call, a brief visit, an act of kindness that did not involve a request or an obligation. Well, I did come to your last birthday party, he finally squeezed out, the effort visible. Yes, you did. I nodded, the memory surprisingly clear. You arrived an hour late, without a card or gift, and you left immediately after the cake was cut, claiming you had a prior engagement with friends. He lowered his head, completely defeated. I didn't mean to be rude. I didn't think about it. That's exactly right, Jonathan. None of you were thinking about my feelings, my needs, or my expectations. I softened my tone slightly. I am not angry with you, my dear. I am truly not. I am simply refusing to participate in this highly unhealthy, one-sided relationship dynamic any longer. We sat in a long, uncomfortable silence. Jonathan looked utterly depressed, hunched over on the sofa. I suddenly saw a brief, vulnerable glimpse of the little boy I had patiently taught to ride his first bicycle, stubborn, yes, but fragile. Look, I leaned forward again. I will not give you the money you are asking for, but I can offer you something much more valuable. He looked up, a flicker of guarded hope returning to his eyes. What is it? My astute lawyer, Francis Whitaker, is currently searching for a reliable, part-time legal assistant. It involves nothing complicated, mainly organizing files, answering the overflow phones, basic administrative duties. It won't instantly solve your entire financial crisis, but it would provide a much-needed, immediate source of income. If you are genuinely interested, I can make a call to Francis on your behalf. Jonathan looked genuinely astonished. You would do that for me, Grandma? After everything I've said, after this huge scene? You are my grandson, Jonathan. I love you unconditionally, but my love will no longer be monetized and expressed in canceled checks or available credit cards. He was silent for a prolonged moment, carefully weighing the unexpected offer. Then he slowly nodded. Okay. Yes, Grandma. I'll definitely give it a serious try. Thank you. When Jonathan finally left, I felt a strange, deep mixture of sadness and surprising satisfaction. Perhaps this painful, brutal conversation was actually the very first, necessary step toward building a new, more honest relationship with my grandson, one based on mutual respect rather than transactional reliance. Or, perhaps, it was simply another manipulative act on his part to reestablish a connection to my wealth. Only time and his future actions would tell the absolute truth. That same quiet evening, Samantha arrived for her planned visit. Unlike her visibly frantic brother, she looked calm, composed, and remarkably self-possessed. "I saw Jonathan leaving on my way over," she remarked as she helped me prepare a simple, elegant dinner. "He looked somewhat quiet." "We discussed money and the critical need for personal responsibility," I replied, efficiently chopping the vegetables for a vibrant salad. "I am not entirely confident he received the message well." Samantha nodded, stirring the dressing with focused concentration. "It's about time he was forced to grow up, Grandma. Jonathan has always had everything handed to him, too easily." I glanced sideways at my granddaughter. She and Jonathan were barely a year apart, yet they were profoundly different. Samantha was always the more independent one, the more emotionally mature. "How are things currently at home, dear?" I asked cautiously, lowering my voice. Samantha let out a deep, heavy sigh. "Honestly, not good at all. My parents are constantly engaged in vicious, non-stop fighting. Mom is blaming Dad for being unable to convince you to reinstate the funding. Dad, in turn, is aggressively claiming that she is the one who completely ruined everything with her incessant snobbery and entitlement." "I am genuinely sorry that you are caught directly in the center of this awful conflict," I said, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. "It's all right, Grandma," she offered a tired, weak smile. "I've known for a very long time that their entire relationship was fundamentally unhealthy. They were together mostly for the high status and financial comfort. Now that the immense financial cushion is completely gone, all the terrible cracks in their foundation are suddenly, horribly visible." She trailed off, but the meaning was powerfully clear. Scott and Tiffany's 25-year marriage had always struck me as an exceptionally strange, almost calculated union, my emotionally soft, compliant son and his fiercely ambitious, ruthlessly overbearing wife. Now, without my limitless financial safety net, the underlying, raw incompatibility had finally surfaced. "They're selling Mom's expensive car," Samantha continued, setting the dinner table. "The German SUV you gave her the money for last year. And they are urgently looking into refinancing the house mortgage, though I doubt they'll manage it." I nodded, offering no comment. A tiny, brief pang of guilt surfaced. I certainly didn't wish to see my son suffer or be evicted, but the overwhelming, rational part of me knew this was a necessary, cruel lesson, decades overdue. "You know, Grandma," Samantha sat down across from me at the table. "I want you to know this. I wholeheartedly support your decision." I looked at her, utterly surprised by the sudden, profound declaration. "You truly do?" "Yes." She nodded firmly. "I have watched them systematically use you for a very long time. Use you, especially my mother." I tried to discuss it with Dad, but he always had an endless supply of flimsy excuses. He was deeply afraid of confronting her. I sat down next to her, profoundly touched by the sincerity of her words. "Thank you, Samantha. That means more to me than you could ever know. I just want you to be genuinely happy." She reached out and took my hand firmly. "You have selflessly cared for all of us for so many years, Grandma. It is finally, unequivocally, your turn to think only about yourself." We ate dinner, talking easily about her work, my newly planned trip to Italy, and the classic literature we had both recently enjoyed. It was a perfectly normal conversation between two people who were truly interested in one another. No desperate requests, no subtle manipulation, no underlying tension. This, I realized, is precisely what a healthy family relationship should feel like. When Samantha prepared to leave, she hugged me with a fierce intensity that transcending our usual affection. "Just know that I will always be here for you, Grandma. No matter what happens between you and my parents." "I know, my dear," I gently stroked her cheek. "And I will always be here for you too. Not because I feel obligated, but because I truly, deeply want to be." After Samantha departed, the house returned to its quiet solitude. I sat alone for a long time, contemplating the strange, winding fortunes of my family. How profoundly strange it was that, out of my entire immediate family, it was my granddaughter who possessed the greatest maturity and the clearest understanding of principle. Perhaps the true purpose of my long life was not only to pass on genetics and material wealth, but also to transmit core values, honesty, principle, and the capacity for genuine, unselfish affection. The phone suddenly rang, sharply interrupting my deep introspection. Scott's number. I hesitated, then answered decisively. Yes, Scott. Mom? His voice was strained, barely controlled. We absolutely need to have a serious family meeting tomorrow. All of us. As a united front. About what, precisely? I asked, my voice calm, clinical. About the impossible financial situation we are now trapped in. About how we can immediately fix this terrible mistake. I sighed wearily. Scott, I have repeatedly told both you and Tiffany that my decision is final. It is completely irrevocable. Mom, please, the pleading tone returned, amplified by desperation. At least hear us out. We are genuinely prepared to offer a significant compromise. Anything you want. I paused, weighing the options carefully. Part of me absolutely did not want to continue this futile cycle of endless, draining confrontation, but a deeper, wiser part of me knew that a clean, total break with my only son would ultimately not bring me lasting peace. Very well, Scott. 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Here at my house. Thank you, Mom. The overwhelming, immediate relief in his voice was sickeningly palpable. We will be there, all of us. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The early evening sky was painted in magnificent shades of pink and deep gold. I thought about tomorrow's meeting, the final, ultimate round of family negotiations. But this time, the rules had fundamentally changed. This time, I was the one holding all the power. I woke before the alarm, long before the sun had fully risen, even though the dreaded family meeting was not scheduled to begin until 2 o'clock that afternoon. Despite my outward display of cold composure, I could feel a low-grade tension coiling tightly in my stomach. Something deep inside warned me that today's conversation would be fundamentally different, far more aggressive, than Scott and Tiffany's previous clumsy attempts at reversing my decision. To effectively distract myself and maintain my calm, I decided to immerse myself in the garden. Working with the cold, damp earth always offered a profound, inexplicable sense of peace. There was something inherently soothing about seeing one's meticulous efforts directly translate into thriving flowers and ripe fruit. By noon, I had finished all the essential weeding, thoroughly watered the beds, showered the dirt from my hands, and prepared a light, elegant lunch for one. Checking the clock, I confirmed I had plenty of time left to gather my thoughts and mentally rehearse my precise responses before my family arrived for their planned ambush. At precisely 2 o'clock, the demanding chime of the doorbell rang. I took a deep, steadying breath and walked slowly to open the door. Scott stood alone on the welcome mat, without Tiffany or the children. Mom. He simply nodded, his eyes already betraying a profound nervousness as he stepped inside. The others will be here momentarily. I wanted to speak with you alone first. I silently led him into the living room, my movements unnervingly calm. Scott looked physically strained. His normally immaculate designer shirt was wrinkled, his eyes sunken with dark circles, his skin sallow. Mom, he began, sinking onto the edge of the sofa directly opposite me. I need you to know immediately that what is about to happen was absolutely not my personal idea. Tiffany insisted on this. I raised a skeptical eyebrow, the gesture conveying a world of accumulated disbelief. And what precisely is about to happen, Scott? He lowered his eyes, shame clearly mixing with deep resentment. Tiffany feels that we must take decisive action, her words, for you to fully grasp how drastically your financial decision is affecting our entire lives and the lives of those around us. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of anxiety deep in my chest. What kind of action, Scott? He opened his mouth to deliver a hurried explanation, but his words were drowned out by the sudden, overwhelming sound of multiple cars pulling up, one after the other, on my driveway. Too many cars. I walked immediately to the window and looked out. I saw a staggering 3 large luxury vehicles now occupying my limited driveway space. Tiffany emerged from the first, perfectly coiffed, dressed in a power suit, a look of cold, unwavering determination etched on her face. Behind her, Jonathan and Samantha. The other cars, however, were filled with a crowd of people I vaguely, distantly recognized. Tiffany's parents, her older sister, and her sister's husband, along with several awkward-looking family friends. Scott, I spun around, turning sharply to my son, the anger now a focused, lethal energy. What is the meaning of this blatant display? He looked genuinely bewildered, the picture of a man who had completely lost control of his own plans. Tiffany decided that a family meeting would be more effective if all of the interested stakeholders were present. Stakeholders. I repeated, the word tasting like ash on my tongue. Your wife brought a crowd of complete outsiders into my home to attempt to shame me and discuss our private family conflict? Before Scott could offer another pathetic excuse, the doorbell rang again, a loud, demanding, angry sound. I walked slowly to open it, feeling the cold, precise anger building, a determined resolve that was far more dangerous than any volatile tantrum. Tiffany stood on the threshold, her professional smile already in place. Evelyn, good afternoon. She spoke far louder than necessary, clearly addressing the gathered audience behind her. We are all here today to discuss the critical situation as a collective family. I surveyed the assembled group, at least 10 people, all looking deeply uncomfortable, yet intensely curious. Tiffany, I said quietly, firmly. I did not invite any of these people into my house. This is a private residence. But this is family, Evelyn, she declared, waving her hands in a grand, exaggerated gesture of theatrical surprise. Isn't a family unit supposed to rally and support one another in times of crisis? I looked her directly in the eye, my voice a quiet steel. No, Tiffany, we are not family. This is my house, and I alone decide who I permit inside. Right now, I am only inviting you, Scott, and the grandchildren. The rest of you must immediately leave. Tiffany took a calculated step forward, her smile thin and strained, the mask of patience beginning to crack. Evelyn, please do not be so aggressively inhospitable. These people have traveled a long way to support us. On your initiative, not mine, I reminded her sharply. I remained unyielding. Either they all leave immediately, or there will be absolutely no conversation whatsoever. There was a tense, drawn-out pause. I could see Tiffany frantically calculating her next move, weighing the cost of losing the audience against the necessity of having the negotiation. Finally, she turned to her relatives, her voice low and tight. I believe it would be more effective if we continue this private family discussion on our own. Please wait in the cars or take a short walk around the block. We will be finished quickly. Tiffany's family members shifted awkwardly, exchanging nervous glances. Finally, her father, a tall, imposing man, gave a stiff nod. Of course, dear. We'll be just outside. I watched in silent judgment as the small crowd dispersed, then stepped aside, allowing Tiffany, Jonathan, and Samantha to enter. Once the front door was firmly shut, I turned back to the 3 of them. So, I began, my voice dangerously calm, despite the cold fury brewing inside. Who is going to tell me precisely what that humiliating circus was all about? Tiffany was, predictably, the first to launch her attack, her composure instantly returning. Evelyn, your recent, sudden decision to withdraw all financial support doesn't just impact Scott and me. It affects our entire extended family structure. My parents were relying on us to help cover the rising costs of their new nursing home fees. Scott's brother, Neil, needs our support because he was just laid off, Scott's brother. I interrupted her, turning to my son, a look of profound disbelief on my face. Do you mean Neil? The one I haven't seen in 5 years because you conveniently forgot to invite him to any family gatherings. Scott looked away, flustered, but Tiffany ruthlessly pressed on. The devastating bottom line, Evelyn, is that your entirely selfish decision has created an enormous, catastrophic domino effect. Everyone is now suffering, including your own grandchildren. Jonathan quickly nodded, eagerly picking up his cue. Grandma, I am going to be evicted by the end of the month. I have no money for rent. I could be homeless. You could temporarily move back in with your parents, I suggested, the obvious solution. That is precisely the problem, Evelyn. Tiffany exclaimed, her hands flying up in a gesture of utter frustration. We can barely afford our own essential payments anymore. The bank is now aggressively threatening to foreclose on the house if we don't cure the mortgage by the end of this week. I looked deliberately over at Samantha, who was standing quietly to the side, looking profoundly uncomfortable. What about you, Samantha? Did you come here today to also demand money, or to make your own dramatic request? She shook her head immediately. No, Grandma. I am here because I absolutely did not want them to speak for me. I respect your decision completely. Tiffany shot her daughter a furious, annoyed glance, but quickly turned back to me, her voice softening, adopting a slick, oily tone. Evelyn, we are genuinely prepared to compromise. We realize we have deeply hurt you. Scott should never have sent that horrible, unprofessional message. It was a single mistake that, ironically, we are all now paying for. This is not about that single, disgusting message, Tiffany. I shook my head, my patience wearing thin. That message was merely the final, necessary trigger. This is about years of calculated neglect, systemic disrespect, and blatant, heartless use. Use? Tiffany threw her hands up in theatrical shock. We are a family, Evelyn. Families support each other. It is incredibly interesting that you only remember the definition of family values when it directly involves money, I remarked, my tone dangerously quiet. Where was this all-important family unity when I spent last Christmas completely alone? When I was sick with the flu and not one of you bothered to stop by to bring me medicine or simply check on me? When it was the anniversary of George's death and none of you called? A heavy, suffocating silence descended. Scott looked down, completely defeated. Jonathan shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact. Only Tiffany remained outwardly defiant. We are all extremely busy, Evelyn, she stated, her voice tight with self-justification. We have demanding careers, social obligations, high-pressure commitments. I also had a highly demanding job and family commitments. I interrupted her, my voice rising slightly for the first time. But I always found the time and the money for my family. I always prioritized your relentless needs above my own. And how, precisely, did you repay me for that absolute devotion? I looked at each of them individually in turn. Scott, what was the last, genuine time you asked me how I was truly feeling? Not as a polite formality, but because you actually deeply cared? My son remained speechless, eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Jonathan, how many times have you visited me purely for pleasure, not because you urgently needed a cash advance or a favor? My grandson licked his lips nervously but offered no answer. Tiffany. I turned my full attention to my daughter-in-law, my voice now cold, clinical. Name one single act of selfless kindness or respect you have ever shown me over the entire course of our relationship. She opened her mouth, searching frantically for a palatable answer, but failed. She was silent. Nothing, I finally answered for her, the devastating truth hanging heavy in the air. You have done absolutely nothing for me. You tolerated my occasional presence only when it was necessary to access my money. You constantly criticized my house, my habits, my entire life. You aggressively turned both Scott and Jonathan against me. And now you stand here, genuinely surprised that I no longer want any part of this toxic charade? I turned back to Scott. Son, I loved you fiercely from the very first day of your life. And I will love you until the last day of mine. But I will no longer participate in this poisonous relationship. I will not finance your extravagant life. I will not turn a blind eye to constant, open disrespect. Scott looked utterly defeated, completely lost. Mom, what precisely do you want us to do? Do you want us to kneel down? Beg for your ultimate forgiveness? No, Scott. I want you all to grow up. To take genuine, full responsibility for your own lives. To learn to truly respect not only me but yourselves. Tiffany let out a harsh, cynical snort. That was a truly touching speech, Evelyn. Very dramatic. Now, let's immediately return to reality. We require the money now. I looked at this woman, poised, beautiful, accustomed to immediate victory. I felt nothing but a deep, profound exhaustion. No, Tiffany. Not now. Not later. Not ever again. You cannot do this to us, she screamed, her voice finally breaking, the veneer of composure shattered. We are your family. Family is not merely a shared surname. I shook my head slowly. It is built on care, respect, attention, all the things I have been systematically denied by you for years. I turned to my grandchildren. Children, I love you both deeply. My door will always remain open for you, but not for asking for money. For real, genuine communication, if that is what you truly want. Samantha nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Jonathan lowered his head, utterly defeated. Now I straightened my spine, summoning my final, absolute authority. I am asking all three of you to immediately leave. This conversation is unequivocally over. Tiffany stared at me, a look of profound, venomous disbelief. You are kicking us out? Right here in front of my entire family delegation. I am asking you to leave, I repeated, my voice unyielding. And take your entire support group with you. Tiffany grabbed her designer purse and stormed toward the door. You will regret this deeply, Evelyn. When you are old, sick, and completely alone, you will remember this day and this cruel decision. Scott hesitated, his eyes darting frantically between his furious wife and his suddenly resolute mother. Mom. Go, Scott. I gently nudged him toward the door. Think deeply about everything I have said. And when you are ready to have a genuine conversation, one that has absolutely nothing to do with money, but everything to do with you and me, I will be waiting. He nodded, a defeated man, and slowly followed his wife out. Jonathan trailed behind him without saying a single word. Only Samantha lingered to give me a quick, tight hug. I'll call you tomorrow, Grandma, she whispered, her voice choked. I'll be waiting, dear, I stroked her cheek. When the door slammed shut behind the last of them, I sank into my armchair, feeling a strange, profound mixture of sadness over the lost relationship and exhilarating relief over my newfound freedom. From the driveway, I could hear a flurry of excited voices. Tiffany was undoubtedly giving her dramatic, biased account of the confrontation to her assembled relatives. I did not care. My final word was spoken, my power reasserted. The phone rang immediately, a sharp, familiar sound cutting through the stunned silence. It was Lorraine. Evelyn, she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. I just drove past your house and saw a whole, frantic delegation retreating from your gate. What on earth transpired? It's a very long story, I sighed, running a tired hand over my face. Tiffany staged what she enthusiastically called a family stakeholders meeting. Oh my God. Lorraine hummed, clearly processing the audacity. How did that humiliating debacle actually go? As well as could possibly be expected, I replied, a dry, humorless amusement in my tone. Lots of self-serving drama, virtually zero genuine comprehension. Are you truly all right, Evelyn? Do you need me to come right over this instant? Before, the old, cautious Evelyn would have immediately declined, not wanting to burden my friend with my toxic family issues. But the new, determined Evelyn knew better. Yes, Lorraine, you absolutely should come over. I think I could use a solid, friendly shoulder right now. I'll be there in less than 20 minutes, she instantly replied. And I'm bringing that phenomenal Merlot we tasted last month. I smiled as I hung up the phone. Something deep inside me understood that this day, painful and exhausting as it was, had been a crucial, necessary step toward my new, self-defined life. A life where Evelyn Hawthorne, for once, came first. 6 months later, the warm Tuscan sun kissed my face as I sat leisurely on the terracotta terrace of a small, charming trattoria, slowly savoring a glass of exquisite, rich local Chianti. Next to me, Lorraine was intensely focused, passionately scribbling notes and observations into her travel journal. I still cannot believe we are actually here, I murmured, gazing out at the picturesque, rolling hills covered with endless rows of ancient vineyards. George would have been so profoundly happy. He would be even more proud of you, Evelyn, Lorraine said, raising her glass in a toast. To the absolutely new, magnificent Evelyn. I smiled, clinking my glass against my friend's. A monumental amount had changed in those 6 turbulent months. Since that final, explosive family meeting, Scott and Tiffany had made several subsequent, desperate attempts to influence my decision. These attempts ranged from vague, unfounded threats of a full-scale legal challenge, which immediately evaporated after Francis Whitaker sent them a chilling, concise letter, to a pitiful surprise visit from Scott himself, armed with a pathetic bouquet of wilted flowers and a highly theatrical apology that, predictably, was instantly followed by another request for immediate financial assistance. I remained absolutely unyielding, completely firm in my resolve. Gradually, their desperate attempts became less frequent, more sporadic, and then, mercifully, stopped altogether. As I learned through my weekly, confidential calls with Samantha, they were ultimately forced to sell the extravagant riverfront house and relocate to a much smaller, far more practical apartment complex further inland. Tiffany had, ironically, been forced to take on an extra, less glamorous job to cover the shortfall, and Scott was, for the first time in his adult life, slowly learning to take some true initiative in managing the family's now precarious finances. Jonathan, much to my surprise, had accepted Francis Whitaker's part-time job offer and actually seemed to have discovered a genuine interest and aptitude for the quiet, meticulous world of legal administration. We had managed to meet a few times, initially awkward, but gradually evolving into more sincere, honest meetings where there were no more financial requests or bitter recriminations. Samantha remained the one unbreakable thread in the family tapestry with whom I maintained regular, deeply valued communication. She called weekly, visited frequently, and shared her news and aspirations. She was the persistent, loving voice that had insisted I stop putting off the Italy trip I had dreamed of for so long. "What has your mind so preoccupied?" Lorraine asked, interrupting my pleasant thoughts. "I'm thinking about how completely my life has transformed in the past 6 months," I replied, taking another long sip of the incredible wine. "Who would ever have thought that, at 83, I would be starting completely over?" Lorraine chuckled heartily. "You were always far stronger than you ever allowed yourself to believe, Evelyn. You just finally permitted that profound strength to shine through." I nodded, looking out at the magnificent sunset painting the hills in rich, golden hues. Lorraine was absolutely right. All my life, I had passively given away my immense personal power to my husband, to my son, to his relentlessly demanding family. It was only now, in my deep old age, that I had finally found the moral courage to wield it purely for myself. My phone vibrated, a text message from Samantha, a picture attached showing her bright, new, small apartment. "Grandma, I absolutely cannot wait for you to come home and see everything for yourself. I hope Italy is beyond beautiful." I smiled as I quickly replied, attaching a spectacular, panoramic shot of the stunning Tuscan landscape. This loving, uncomplicated bond with my granddaughter was precious and irreplaceable. It was the only remaining thread of my family that endured because it was fundamentally rooted in true, selfless affection, not in corrosive financial dependence. That evening, back at our cozy, picturesque hotel, I settled onto the balcony with my book. In the adjacent room, Lorraine was on a long, cheerful phone call with her own daughter. I could hear the comforting sound of her easy laughter through the open window. I contemplated the pervasive, debilitating fear of being alone that had plagued me for my entire life. I remembered how desperately I had clung to those unhealthy, toxic relationships with my family, all for the singular, frantic purpose of avoiding solitude. And how, paradoxically, it was the definitive, painful decision to let go of those soul-destroying relationships that had ultimately brought me the true, profound joy and freedom I now experienced. Yes, my life had fewer people in it now. But those who remained, Samantha, Lorraine, and the old friends I had actively sought out and reconnected with, were there for authentic, real reasons. Out of mutual affection, profound respect, and a genuine, reciprocal interest in one another's lives. I recalled Tiffany's final, venomous threat. "You'll bitterly regret this, Evelyn. When you're old and completely alone, you'll remember this day." But I was not alone. I was wholly, wonderfully with myself. For the first time in decades, I was truly, completely present, not dissolved into the overwhelming needs and expectations of others. Lorraine and I had plans to visit a historic, local winery in the morning, followed by a small, hidden art museum in a neighboring village. No rigid schedules, no exhausting commitments, only activities that brought us unadulterated pleasure. This was the glorious new shape of my life since that decisive, fateful day 6 months ago, a life where I had finally allowed myself to be the protagonist, rather than a perpetual financial supporting character. I breathed in the warm, fragrant evening air, now saturated with the sense of Tuscany and my own quiet triumph. George would be pleased, I knew it. He always said I deserved far more than I had ever allowed myself to claim. And though it had taken many years and a devastating, painful epiphany, I had finally, fully realized he was right. At 83, I had at last learned the most crucial, vital lesson of all, to love myself as deeply and unconditionally as I had loved others. The phone vibrated again, breaking the perfect silence. It was Scott's number this time. Previously, I would have immediately answered, ready to drop everything for his urgent call. But now, I simply placed the phone quietly on the side table. Whatever my son needed to say could wait indefinitely. This sacred time was mine. I raised my eyes to the dazzling, star-filled Italian sky and smiled peacefully. All 189 receipts, all the years of suffocating concessions and painful sacrifices, all that agonizing history was now firmly in the past. Ahead lay only freedom. The freedom to simply be myself, without the crushing weight of other people's relentless demands and expectations. And it was, finally, the most beautiful freedom I had ever truly known. The profound peace of Tuscany, so meticulously earned, was brutally shattered a week later by the insistent, vibrating ring of my phone on the bedside table. It was the middle of the afternoon, and Lorraine was downstairs negotiating the purchase of a grotesque, but charming local ceramic vase. The screen displayed a familiar, dreaded number. Tiffany. I watched it ring twice, 3 times, a flicker of the old compulsion to answer battling the new, fierce resolve. I rejected the call. The phone instantly rang again, a relentless, desperate sound. I finally answered, the word hello sharp and completely devoid of warmth. Evelyn? Oh, thank God. It wasn't the usual polished, demanding voice I expected. Tiffany's voice was hoarse, ragged, thick with genuine, uncontrolled panic. You have to listen to me. This is critical, life-changing. I am on vacation, Tiffany. If this is about money, I told you the conversation is permanently over. It's not about the mortgage, Evelyn. It's about Samantha. The mention of my granddaughter immediately cut through my composure, freezing the calm reserve I had built over 6 months. What about Samantha? What have you done? I demanded, my voice dangerously low. She's gone, Evelyn. She left. Scott and we don't know where she is. She left a note yesterday morning, and she hasn't answered her phone since. What kind of note? I snapped, the blood draining from my face. I walked quickly, blindly, to the balcony, my view of the peaceful Italian hills a sickening contrast to the terror flooding my mind. Tiffany took a shuddering breath, the sound of her frantic breathing unnervingly close. It was just vague. Something about needing space to breathe, and that she couldn't watch the destruction anymore. She said she was leaving the city. Evelyn, she took almost nothing, only a small backpack. My mind instantly raced, dismissing the theatrical panic in Tiffany's voice and focusing only on the raw information. Samantha was 18, newly an adult, fiercely independent. This was not a runaway attempt. This was a principled retreat. But where? And why the extreme secrecy? Why are you calling me now, Tiffany? You haven't spoken to me in 6 months. The calculated pause was brief but notable. Because she mentioned you, Evelyn. In the note. She wrote that you were the only one who understood, and that she was going to find the strength you found. We fear she might try to contact you, or maybe even travel to where you are. I am in Italy, Tiffany. She doesn't have the means to cross an ocean. But she might try. She's desperate. And Evelyn, there's something else, something terrifying you need to know. Jonathan is involved. The chilling confession was finally out. What does Jonathan have to do with this? I demanded. He's gone too, Evelyn. He left last night. But he didn't leave a note. He just cleaned out his bank account, the one he started after getting that job with Francis, and disappeared. And Samantha's note specifically mentioned him. She wrote, "I'm trying to save us both before we drown in your toxicity." The raw truth hit me. Samantha hadn't just run away. She had orchestrated a desperate, coordinated escape for herself and her emotionally vulnerable brother. And the motivation wasn't financial. It was a profound, desperate rejection of their parents' poisonous environment. "I see," I managed, my voice now cold and perfectly controlled, the panic replaced by a lethal focus. "You have finally driven your own children away with your constant greed and fighting. And you only call me when you lose the one person who truly matters to you." Tiffany began to sob, the sound grating and utterly insincere. "Evelyn, please. Don't judge me now. We're terrified. Samantha is vulnerable. We need her back. She is the only decent thing we have left. She is the only decent thing you systematically destroyed, Tiffany." I countered, the accusation sharp and unforgiving. "If she contacts me, I will not immediately notify you. I will first ensure her safety and mental well-being. That is my only priority now." "But she is a minor," Tiffany shrieked, instantly reverting to legal threats, though Samantha was legally an adult. "We can call the police." "Do that, Tiffany. And I will be forced to instruct Francis Whitaker to inform the authorities about the years of financial and emotional abuse that directly led to this catastrophic runaway situation. You may find yourself facing charges, not your daughter." I paused, letting the threat settle like poison in the line. "Now, tell me everything. Every detail. No lies. What was the last thing you said to Samantha? What was the final, devastating straw?" Tiffany's voice, now stripped bare of all pretense, cracked. She recounted a grueling, vicious fight the night before the escape. The fight wasn't about money or the house. It was about Samantha's acceptance into a prestigious university art program, the only thing my granddaughter had ever truly desired. Tiffany, furious over Samantha's continuing relationship with me and her quiet disapproval of the family's financial chaos, had allegedly shouted that Samantha was a sentimental fool who would never amount to anything and that her art was worthless. A cold, calculated attack on my granddaughter's deepest passion. "Scott did nothing," Tiffany confessed, the shame finally audible. "He just stood there. He was too terrified to cross me." The pieces clicked into place. Samantha had witnessed her father's total moral collapse and realized her life under their roof was irrevocably lost. Her escape was an act of profound self-preservation, and she had taken Jonathan, whom she saw slipping back into his old, destructive habits, with her. "If they contact you, they will be heading to George's old hunting cabin up north," I told her, my voice now purely transactional. "It's the only place they know to hide." "The cabin," Tiffany wailed. "But how would they get there? Jonathan's old car broke down months ago. They'll find a way." "They're desperate," I said. "Now I am hanging up. You will not call me again. If I hear from them, I will call you. But be warned, if you go near that cabin or try to interfere, I will personally guarantee that you lose both your children permanently, legally and emotionally. Is that clear?" Tiffany's desperate, choked affirmation was the last thing I heard before I ended the call. I walked downstairs, my face rigid. Lorraine was there, proudly holding a vase shaped like a surprisingly angry cherub. "Lorraine, we have an emergency," I stated, pulling her aside. "My grandchildren are gone. They ran away. I need to leave Italy today." Lorraine dropped the vase onto the sofa, the seriousness of my tone immediately overriding her surprise. "Tell me what I need to do, Evelyn. When is the next flight to New York?" Within 3 frantic hours, our Italian idol was canceled, the hotel bill paid, and we were in a taxi heading toward the nearest international airport. During the long, agonizing flight back across the Atlantic, I had time to think, to process the new, terrifying reality. The financial revenge against Scott and Tiffany was complete, but it had come at a horrific, unexpected cost. The complete disintegration of the family unit and the emotional flight of the only 2 people I truly cared about. My revenge had wounded the innocent. As soon as we landed, I called Francis Whitaker. Francis, I need you to legally trace all credit card activity from a specific account, Jonathan's new savings account, and tell me the precise route they are taking. They're heading to the old cabin. I need a driver and a safe, reliable car ready for me by dawn. Evelyn, this sounds extremely serious. Are the police involved? Not yet, Francis. And they won't be. This is a private retrieval. Samantha and Jonathan are in danger from their own parents. I need to reach them before Scott and Tiffany realize the full extent of the betrayal and panic. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen over the New York skyline, I was in a large, comfortable SUV, driven by a professional, discreet driver Francis had personally hired. Lorraine had insisted on coming, sitting next to me in the back seat, holding my hand firmly. I am not letting you go on this terrifying rescue mission alone, Evelyn. I'm simply here for moral support and to force you to stop thinking the worst, she stated, her face grim. Francis called 10 minutes into the drive. Evelyn, they are driving an old, beat-up pickup truck. They paid for gas in 3 different states. They crossed into Vermont 2 hours ago. They are roughly 200 miles ahead of you, heading directly to the cabin. They're moving fast. I leaned back against the leather seat, closing my eyes. My final mission had begun. The money, the will, the trust, all that was merely tactic. Saving the last fragments of my family was the ultimate, necessary strategy. I had stripped their parents of their security. Now I had to offer the children the only thing left, a completely safe haven and a genuine future. The long, grueling drive through the dense, early autumn landscape of New England was a blur of highway miles and hushed, intense planning. The large SUV, with its discreet, tinted windows, devoured the distance between New York and the remote northern woods of Vermont where George's old hunting cabin stood, a rustic, isolated sanctuary that now served as the last refuge for the only 2 people I still cared to save. Lorraine remained my silent, steadfast anchor, her presence a powerful, comforting counterweight to the cold anxiety that gripped me. I had to focus not on the raw fear of what Samantha and Jonathan might be facing, but on the precise, calculated strategy required to ensure their safe retrieval and their future security. If Scott and Tiffany panic and call the authorities, they will paint me as a deranged, controlling grandmother kidnapping her grandchildren, I muttered, staring out at the passing trees. I needed defense immediately. I placed a high-priority, confidential call to Francis Whitaker, using the secure satellite phone Lorraine had insisted we bring. Francis, I need one last, powerful legal shield. I am approaching the cabin. I need you to draft and file a temporary guardianship petition for both Samantha and Jonathan, focusing on their emotional and financial vulnerability under their parents' demonstrable neglect and abuse. File it immediately with the Vermont State Supreme Court or the highest authority you can reach. I need those papers in my hand, or at least a confirmed filing number, within the next hour. Evelyn, this is highly unorthodox and aggressive. Francis's voice crackled over the line, laced with professional caution. Samantha is legally an adult, and Jonathan is well past the age of majority. Filing for guardianship over 2 adults requires extraordinary proof. The proof is their self-confessed escape from an abusive financial and emotional environment, Francis. The proof is their abandonment by parents whose primary concern is money. Use the text messages, use Tiffany's admission on the call. Do it now. This isn't about control, it's about protection. The last legal bullet, I have to prevent Scott from dragging them back into the house I paid for. He paused, recognizing the absolute, necessary finality in my voice. Consider it done, Evelyn. I will call you with the filing number, but it will take every ounce of professional influence I possess. 2 grueling hours later, the SUV slowed, turning off the narrow, paved road onto a dirt track barely visible under a thick carpet of pine needles. The air immediately grew colder, heavier with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The cabin stood ahead, a small, worn structure of dark logs, looking exactly as it had decades ago, a refuge frozen in time. I felt a sudden, profound rush of raw, unadulterated emotion. There was an unfamiliar, battered, old pickup truck parked haphazardly near the front porch. They were here. Stay here, Lorraine, I instructed, my hand already resting on the door handle. If the bank manager's wife shows up, you call the police immediately. I stepped out into the biting chill, pulling my coat tight, and approached the porch with deliberate, heavy steps. I didn't knock. I simply opened the creaking wooden door and walked inside. The cabin was dimly lit by a single kerosene lamp on a rough-hewn table. Samantha and Jonathan were sitting huddled together near the cold stone fireplace, wrapped in thick, old blankets, looking utterly exhausted and vulnerable. They looked up, their eyes widening in shock and disbelief. "Grandma?" Samantha whispered, her voice barely audible, choked with fear and relief. Jonathan instantly shot up, his body instinctively protective of his sister, his face a mask of guilt. "How did you find us? Did Mom send you?" "No, my dear. Your mother sent me a desperate cry for help, an admission that she had finally lost you both." I walked toward them, slowly, deliberately, my gaze fixed on my granddaughter. "I came because you're the last two things I care about in this broken family, and I am here to get you out of this miserable situation, permanently." Samantha burst into immediate tears, rushing into my arms with a force that almost knocked me off balance. I held her tightly, stroking her hair, the years of pain and unspoken understanding flooding between us. "I couldn't stay, Grandma. I just couldn't watch them anymore. I couldn't watch them destroy Dad, and I couldn't let them destroy me." Jonathan remained rooted by the fireplace, his face pale. "They're going to call the police, Grandma. We took money from Mom's safe, just enough for gas." "That money doesn't matter, Jonathan. Your parents' priorities matter. They don't care about the money, they care about control and image. Now, we need to leave. We have very little time before they find this place." As if summoned by my prediction, the silence outside was violently shattered by the sound of a roaring, expensive engine approaching the cabin. I quickly moved to the window and saw a dark sedan skidding to a halt just behind my large SUV. Scott and Tiffany had arrived. Tiffany burst out of the car first, her face a mask of contorted rage and manufactured sorrow. "Samantha!" "Jonathan!" she screamed, running toward the cabin. "Thank God. You're coming home right now. Your grandmother has been lying to you." Scott followed, his eyes fixed on me, a mixture of betrayal and panic in his gaze. He looked more pathetic than menacing. I turned to my driver, who was already running toward the porch. "Get Lorraine inside, immediately," I instructed. "Children, stay behind me. Do not move." Tiffany stumbled into the cabin, her breath catching as she saw her children huddled behind me. "You self-serving, manipulative old woman," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You set us up. You drove them away." "I merely removed the financial support that masked the cancer in your marriage, Tiffany. You drove them away yourself." Scott stepped in, his voice cracked with genuine, raw fear. "Mom, please. Don't do this. We are desperate. We need them home. The bank is freezing our final assets. We have absolutely nothing left. And you think I will allow my grandchildren to return to that sinking ship of an existence?" I met his desperate, pleading eyes. "You have nothing left, Scott, because you chose a life of greed over a life of integrity." Tiffany stepped forward, her voice dropping to a theatrical, tearful plea. "We know you canceled the payments. But you told Samantha a lie. We need her to come home immediately because Scott is having a medical emergency. He has a terminal illness, Evelyn. We need Samantha's support. You will be responsible for his death." The lie was shocking, sickening, and utterly predictable, a desperate, cruel attempt to emotionally manipulate their daughter. I looked at Scott, whose face immediately went white, not from a terminal illness, but from the sudden, cold exposure of his wife's ultimate lie. He opened his mouth to deny it, but Tiffany shot him a venomous, silencing look. My phone suddenly vibrated sharply in my coat pocket. Francis Whitaker. I calmly pulled it out and answered on speakerphone, my eyes never leaving Scott and Tiffany. "Francis, what is the status?" "Evelyn, it's filed. Effective immediately, the Vermont Superior Court has issued a temporary injunction granting you immediate, temporary emergency guardianship over both Samantha and Jonathan, pending a full psychological and financial review of the family situation." The parents are legally restrained from interference. You have full legal control, Evelyn. I dropped the phone back into my pocket, the silence in the small cabin now complete and deafening. I looked directly at Tiffany, my gaze a cold, unwavering weapon. Terminal illness? A desperate, cruel lie. The only emergency here is your desperate need for control. I have the final legal papers, Tiffany. As of 5 minutes ago, I possess the temporary, court-mandated legal guardianship over both Samantha and Jonathan. They are legally under my protection, and you are both immediately barred from interference or contact. Tiffany's face crumpled, her rage instantly dissolving into genuine, horrific disbelief. Scott stumbled back, his last hope evaporating entirely. Guardianship? You can't. They're adults. There are children. He choked out. The court saw the evidence of emotional neglect and financial instability, Scott. And the court agreed with my assessment. I took Samantha's hand and gently placed my other on Jonathan's shoulder. We are leaving now. You are both safe. You haven't won, Evelyn. Tiffany shrieked, her voice high and unstable. You may have the law, but you will still be utterly alone. We will fight you in court. I have already won, Tiffany. I looked at Samantha, then at Jonathan, two faces now showing a fragile, budding hope. I have the only two people who matter. I am not alone. I looked at my son, his face a landscape of regret and desperation. The only thing left for you, Scott, is to deal with the consequences of your own choices. Your life of dependency is officially over. I turned and led Samantha and Jonathan out of the cabin, leaving Scott and Tiffany standing in the chilling silence of the rustic room, two ghosts trapped in the ruin of the life I had once paid for. I walked away from the dilapidated cabin, my head held high, framed by the cold, dense backdrop of the Vermont woods. Behind me, Scott and Tiffany were left stranded, their final, despicable attempt at manipulation, the fabricated medical crisis, having failed catastrophically under the weight of Francis's unexpected legal maneuver. I didn't look back. The defeat in their eyes, the sheer, helpless horror of realizing they had lost the only people who truly mattered, was the final, bitter course of my long-delayed revenge. My driver, a quiet, efficient man named Mr. Hayes, quickly ushered Samantha and Jonathan into the warm safety of the SUV. Lorraine embraced them both tightly, her tears a genuine, loving contrast to the dry-eyed malice we had just left behind. You are safe now, my dears, I murmured, settling into the spacious back seat between them, the warmth of their bodies a tangible, precious comfort. Jonathan was the first to speak, his voice still shaky but filled with a new, quiet determination. Guardianship? You did that for us? But we're adults. The court recognized your profound need for protection from emotional and financial harm, Jonathan, I explained gently, looking at the papers Francis had sent. This is a temporary legal shield, my dear. It keeps your parents at bay while we establish your true independence. It means they can't force you home. It means you are finally, irrevocably free to choose your own lives. Samantha rested her head on my shoulder, exhausted but calm. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you for saving us from the toxicity. I knew you would be the only one who understood. The journey back to the city was filled not with panic, but with quiet, meticulous planning. We discussed colleges, new apartment options, and secure bank accounts. For Jonathan, the job with Francis was now his lifeline, a genuine chance to build a financial foundation without my checks. For Samantha, the prestigious art school acceptance she had suppressed was now within reach. The financial revenge was complete, but the moral victory felt infinitely sweeter. Over the next few weeks, Francis Whitaker moved with the ruthless efficiency of a legal artist. The guardianship petition was upheld, effectively sidelining Scott and Tiffany until a comprehensive family court review, a review they were terrified to face, knowing the full extent of their neglect would be laid bare. They didn't fight it. Their attention quickly shifted from emotional warfare to survival. They lost the last of their assets. The smaller apartment they had been renting was foreclosed upon. Scott, unable to bear the public humiliation and the stress of the collapsing house of cards, was forced to take early, humiliating retirement. Tiffany, stripped of her high-end clientele and her social connections, was left scrambling for sales jobs in completely different, low-status markets. My world, conversely, was reborn. Samantha began her art degree, living in a quiet, sunlit apartment I had purchased through the Irrevocable Trust, an asset that technically belonged to the trust, offering her security without direct dependence. Jonathan, meticulously managing his finances, quickly excelled at Francis's office, slowly regaining his self-respect and maturity. He and Samantha were building a new life, based not on entitlement, but on hard-earned choice and mutual support. My relationship with Lorraine flourished. We rescheduled our Italy trip, this time for a luxurious, extended tour of the Mediterranean. I was finally free to be Evelyn, a benefactor, yes, but only on my own terms, and only to those who truly deserved it. 2 years after that devastating day in the Vermont cabin, I received a carefully worded, utterly formal letter from Scott. It wasn't a plea for cash, it was a desperate, almost pathetic request for a single, final meeting, just to talk about the future, Mom. I agreed, meeting him in a neutral, busy downtown cafe. Scott looked older, weary, his once pristine suit now cheap and ill-fitting. "Tiffany and we're divorcing," he admitted, avoiding my gaze. She left. I'm living alone in a small rented room. I realize now that the money was the only thing holding any of it together. He finally looked up at me, his eyes filled with a lifetime of profound, bitter regret. "I was wrong, Mom. About everything. I drove you away and I drove the kids away. I guess you won." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "I didn't win, Scott. I merely survived the life you chose for me. And I gave you the one thing you desperately needed, the chance to finally stand on your own." He nodded, the truth finally sinking in. "I heard you set up some kind of trust to protect everything. I know I don't deserve anything, but is there anything left for me, Mom? For my retirement?" He was still asking for money, even after all this. "There is money, Scott," I confirmed quietly. "It is secured in the Irrevocable Trust. And per my current, legally filed will, you and Jonathan are allocated the minimum legal share, enough to ensure you do not starve." He absorbed this information, then looked at me, a final, raw question burning in his eyes. "And Samantha? She got everything else, didn't she? The bulk of the estate?" "Samantha," I corrected him, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face, and the library support charity, which always valued literacy and culture more than consumption. The irony of the situation, however, was about to hit him with the force of a train. "But, Mom," Scott stammered, his mind racing through the documents Francis had filed. "Wait. If the trust is irrevocable, and if the will is based on that trust, what about Jonathan? Didn't you cut him off?" I paused, letting the final, devastating piece of the puzzle fall into place. "Jonathan received the legal minimum in the final will, Scott. Just like you. However, Jonathan is also a full-time, salaried employee of Francis Whitaker, my attorney. He is also a primary beneficiary of the separate educational fund I set up for his career training. He chose to work for his future, Scott. You chose to beg for yours." The final betrayal wasn't the cancellation of the checks, it was the realization that Jonathan, whom they had deemed spoiled and weak, was now inextricably tied to my legal and financial world, independent of their ruin. I left the cafe and drove away, no longer looking at my son, who remained slumped in his chair, utterly defeated, facing a bleak, uncertain future he had earned. The ultimate price of my freedom was the total, final fracture of my relationship with Scott, but the ultimate gain was the liberation of Samantha and Jonathan. My revenge was complete, executed not with malice, but with cold, precise justice. That year, Lorraine and I embarked on a cruise to the Norwegian fjords, two powerful, older women entirely in control of their own time and destiny. My days were filled with painting, reading, and traveling. I had stopped paying 189 bills for a family that didn't love me, but I had finally paid the only bill that mattered, the cost of my own, long overdue freedom. The next chapter was finally mine to write, and I started with a quiet, triumphant sentence. Evelyn Hawthorne was finally home. The end.